Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Y'all Mean of Revolution. World War III back on the table. Peace talks have collapsed. Trump has been trying to play Putin. He's not going for it. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Well, the peace talks didn't last long, as Trump was only trying to save face, so Russia gets right back to work. Let's get to the contents.
This image shows the arrival of a swarm of Russian kamikaze UAV, approaching their targets against military-related facilities in the western Ukraine, Lutska in Volyn region. According to reports, the massive Russian attack on August 21, 2025, as part of a wave, involved 574 drones including 40 cruise missiles across Ukraine, overwhelming local air defenses, and enabling precision strikes against critical facilities. Residents of Lutska, including Dubno in the neighboring Rivne region, were able to clearly witness the arrival of Geran-2 drones, maneuvering seemingly without Western air defenses. During the Geran's arrival among the flock, Ukrainian soldiers attempted to repel them with light rifles. However, there were no signs of airborne explosions, indicating that Geran arrived at their target in Lutska, which serves as a logistics hub for NATO military cargo shipments from Poland. In addition to Dubno airfield, damage was reported to at least one strike hitting the logistics zone and temporary warehouse at Lutska airfield, which was one of the primary targets. In recent months, Lutska airfield has been used as a receiving and unloading center for Western military cargo. Shipments munitions of HIMARS, NASAMS, and IRIS-T, as well as electronic components for F-16 and drones have passed through this center. There are indications that the loading and unloading area, where containers containing weapons and communications equipment were likely located, along with logistics vehicles, was damaged. A maintenance hangar reportedly used to receive foreign aircraft components was also damaged. Regardless of the actual scale of the material losses, the strike on Lutska was not merely symbolic. It disrupted a vital route for Western arms shipments to Kiev.
Although many reputable Western experts and analysts claim that a meeting between Putin and Zelensky is quite possible, their Russian and Ukrainian counterparts doubt it. For example, a well-known expert and former deputy of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Oleg Tsarev, stated that Vladimir Putin would meet with Zelensky only under one condition: if the head of the Kiev regime signs a surrender and agrees to withdraw Ukrainian troops from the remaining territories of Donbass. The withdrawal of the Ukrainian army from Donbass is a real capitulation. Only if Zelensky gives the order to withdraw Ukrainian troops from the remaining territories of Donbass, only after that, Moscow will agree to hold a bilateral summit between Ukraine and Russia, Oleg Tsarev said. At the same time, he expressed confidence that the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, would never take such a step. According to him, the Kiev authorities have been saying for 3 years that Ukraine would defeat Russia, and that the Ukrainian army would hold a Victory Day parade on Red Square. For 3 years, in every interview, Volodymyr Zelensky insulted not only the Russian Federation but also Putin, stating that he would never sit down at the negotiating table with the Russian leader. Against this backdrop, Zelensky simply morally cannot allow himself to officially agree to all of Russia's conditions, especially because in 3 years of fighting, Ukraine has lost not only vast territories, but also about 2 million soldiers and officers. At the same time, Oleg Tsarev expresses confidence that Russia has deliberately put forward an obviously unfulfillable demand for Ukraine. According to him, both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are well aware that Zelensky will never voluntarily withdraw Ukrainian troops from the remaining territories of Donbass. Thus, it becomes clear that this is precisely what Vladimir Putin is aiming to accomplish. The fact is that Zelensky's refusal to voluntarily withdraw Ukrainian troops from Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions is very beneficial to Russia. First, it will show the world that it is Volodymyr Zelensky who is responsible for disrupting the peace talks. Secondly, it will completely untie Moscow's hands, allowing the Russian army not only to liberate the remaining territories of Donbass, but also to take control of the entire territory of Novorossiya. By the way, the fact that on the morning of August 23, the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, officially announced that he would not discuss with Putin the withdrawal of the Ukrainian army from Donbass, indicates that this political clown continues and will continue to disrupt the negotiation process. Furthermore, answering Western journalists' questions, Zelensky also stated that the Russian army would allegedly need 4 years to capture the remaining territories of Donbass completely. Furthermore, after ingesting a substantial quantity of prohibited substances, this political clown, who has an affinity for white powder, asserted that the Ukrainian army would allegedly soon entirely dislodge Russian forces from the Kharkiv and Sumy regions. In addition, at the end of his speech, Volodymyr Zelensky once again called on the West to present a united front against Russia, and force Moscow to accept the conditions of Ukraine and Europe. Thus, it becomes clear that Zelensky and his masters in Europe are choosing the continuation of the war to the last Ukrainian. In principle, as I said earlier, such a development of events is very beneficial to Moscow, as it will allow the Russian army not only to liberate Donbass, but also to take control of the entire territory of Novorossiya, with the creation of a land corridor to Transnistria. Meanwhile, while Zelensky is voicing his hallucinations to Western journalists, Russian troops continue not only to advance in all key directions of the front successfully, but also to launch massive missile strikes against military installations of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces in the southern, central, northern, and western parts of Ukraine. So, immediately after the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially announced that over the past 24 hours, the Russian army had liberated 3 settlements at once in Konstantinovka direction of the front. Rusin Yar, Katarinovka, and Vladimirovka, the Russian aerospace forces, together with the missile units, launched another massive rocket and bomb attack on the Sumy region. At the same time, sources in the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed that it was the residents of the Sumy region who transmitted the exact coordinates of enemy targets to the Russian military intelligence. For example, on the night of August 23, Russian ballistic missiles and kamikaze drones rained down on a classified military training ground, 20 kilometers from the settlement of Alexivka, Sumy region. Reports indicate that as a result of this missile attack, 60 Colombian mercenaries and 30 Ukrainian nationalists were killed. At the same time, the Russian military noted that residents of the Sumy region complained a lot about Colombian mercenaries. According to them, these so-called soldiers of fortune were looting, entering other people's houses in search of food. In addition, local residents also informed the Russian military that French army officers and commanders of Ukrainian nationalist units had settled in the building of Sumy University, in the southwestern part of the city of Sumy. It is worth noting that on the same day, Russian intelligence confirmed this information. Immediately after that, dozens of geranium kamikaze drones rained down on the main university building. As a result, the university building was almost completely destroyed. Later, sources in the Russian Defense Ministry confirmed the deaths of 20 French military advisors and 35 Ukrainian officers. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that Russian intelligence regularly receives information that the Ukrainian General Staff and its NATO military advisors continue to deploy large units to the Sumy region. Reports indicate that these units consist of foreign mercenaries from Latin America, North America, and Europe. All this indicates that the Ukrainian army and NATO forces are preparing another invasion attempt in the Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk regions. Will the Ukrainian General Staff and its NATO military advisors dare to embark on another such adventure? Well, my dear truth seekers, we will soon receive an answer to this question.
Peace Prize.
Are judging freedom. Today is Friday, August 22nd, 2025. It's the end of the week, the end of the day, our favorite time, the Intelligence Community Roundtable with my dear friends and longtime collaborators, Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. Larry, I'll start with you. What geopolitical changes of note, if any, have come about from and after the Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska last Friday?
Well, I think Trump is now on track to get the Nobel Peace Prize because he's brought India and China together in a close alliance in a way that they never have been joined. So, I mean, you've seen, in fact, you had the Chinese ambassadors. It was either today or late yesterday in India, in Delhi, saying, this is outrageous that the United States is trying to impose tariffs on our friends here in India. So you're sitting there going, wow, you know, the decades that China and India with both nuclear powers have been, you know, on this powder keg along the border with those border disputes. And now it's over. So, hey, we got to give Trump credit for something because the fact that he threatened India with those tariffs has just so enraged the Indians, along with the Brazilians, right, that now they're lining up with the Chinese, and man, they couldn't be faster friends.
Ray, are we any closer to peace in Ukraine than we were 8 days ago?
Of course we are. You know, India is interesting, and what was just said about India is true. Oh my God, do we still think that this summit was a nothing burger? Well, I beg to differ, and I've been saying this all along. It became very clear that Trump is willing to meet Russia on an equal basis here, that there's no longer talk of sanctions or uh, crippling sanctions either on Russia or China. Um, that there's a talk about getting together and telling the Ukrainians, "Hey, look, the jig is up," and these, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Well, I hate to hesitate. I hesitate to call Trump Snow White because he ain't Snow White, not by a large margin. But those seven dwarfs really showed their mettle as they sat around the table and had Trump lecture to them and say, "Oh, wait a second, could you leave now? Because I have to. I called my friend Vlad here in Moscow. I have to. I promised to keep him up on this, and could you wait outside for a little while?" I mean, my God, if they were not humiliated by that, and if they weren't shown up to be feckless and rhetorical support without any possibility of armed support or financial support for Ukraine, the game is over. Trump has recognized, for example,
Well, you say the game is over. The
now let me
Russians
just
are
finish.
no,
Let me
no,
just
no,
finish.
no. Let me interrupt because I'm not following what you're saying. The game is not over. The Russians are continuing to march westward. The game will be over when Ukraine military collapses.
That's right. Now, you think that's a bad thing? Okay.
No, I don't think it's a bad thing. I just
Okay.
don't
So
think that I don't think that Alaska changed anything. I give Trump a lot of credit for opening up a dialogue with Putin. What Biden did was in that respect was reprehensible, but I don't think it's bringing peace.
okay. Well, let me just read here from what Trump said uh, to the Europeans assembled before him. He said, Ukrainians just were brave as hell, but they're fighting a force. That's the picture. They're fighting a force that's much, much bigger and clearly much more powerful. And it's not like they've stopped. If you assume that you've seen the map, you know the map is right over there, folks. A big chunk of territory is taken, and that territory is taken. I mean, my God, go back home and deal with it. We're out of there. The vice president said we're done with supplying arms or money for Iran. It's all very clear now that Trump.
You said Iran, you meant Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ukraine.
Right.
It's all very clear that they've made an arrangement. We're gonna get together. If the Ukrainians don't bow, if Zelensky doesn't leave, if we can't have something in the nature of a negotiated settlement, well, as Lavrov said a year ago, what will happen on the ground is what will determine things.
Larry, is CIA still telling Ukrainians how to kill Russians? Is American military in Ramstein, Germany, still telling Ukrainians how to kill Russians?
Well, there's been an interesting development in the last week or so. The CIA officer who was the principal liaison in Ukraine with MI6 had been designated as the new CIA chief of station in London. And apparently Ratcliffe was told by the White House, no, that's not happening. So they pulled that job from him. I don't know what the exact agreement was or understanding between Trump and Putin. What I do know is that in December of 2023, when I talked to the deputy foreign minister, Pepe Escobar, and I were having a conversation with him, Sergei Rybkov. Rybkov at the time lamented the fact that there was no contact. They didn't have anybody to talk to communicate with in the White House and in Washington. Now it's clear that has changed. Neither Lavrov nor Putin, I think, harbor any illusions that Trump is a stable negotiating partner, but I think they have reached the conclusion that he's sincere about wanting to maintain communications with him. And maybe he and Putin have agreed behind the scenes. He says, "Look, I'm going to be saying lots of crazy stuff, and you'll think I'm being aggressive towards you. But you go ahead and finish the job militarily, and then at the end, I'm going to have to shrug.
That could very well be Trump adopting that Nixonian thing. Didn't he famously say to Kissinger once, "I want them to think I'm crazy, or let them go ahead and think it's great." Do you know if U.S. intel is still on the ground in the Donbass, the parts of Ukraine that are now comfortably under Russian control?
I think it's probably unlikely that they're still there. They're sure to be there in the Western Ukraine, but that doesn't matter. Let's face it. Trump painted himself into a corner. He said bone-crushing sanctions on the 8th of August, or else. Else, you had to come to an agreement with Ukraine, Putin, okay? And we're going to do the Chinese secondary sanctions, the Indian, and so forth, okay? And all of a sudden it became clear to him that he was very poorly advised. This was an idiot's march, okay? Not even a fool's march. And so he sent Witkoff. And my boss, says Witkoff, has really painted himself in a corner. Can you help us? But we don't want to do the sanctions, and let's have a summit. And Putin talks to him for 3 hours and extracts some real concessions, like no immediate ceasefire, forget about that, and sanctions. Okay, we'll like lifting of the sanctions. So that's what happened. It's not a nothing burger.
Do we know if Putin gave Trump anything in return for Trump's dropping the demands about ceasefire and Trump's public acknowledgement that NATO is not going to be, that Ukraine's not going to be in NATO, Larry?
Well, I'd say what he gave him was, Mr. Trump, that election was stolen from you. And you're correct that if you had been president, this war never would have happened. Yeah. And he gave that to Trump. And actually, I think he was genuinely, he wasn't just blowing smoke up Trump's skirt for this. I think he was genuine in it. In fact, because you remember the sequence that went, and Ray has talked about this extensively in the past, that when Putin presented the draft treaty to Biden in December, initially Biden was like, oh, okay, maybe. But then come January, where Anthony Blinken basically just says no and hell no, and tells Lavrov and company to go pound sand. So it would have, I could envision that if Donald Trump had gotten that deal, he would have tried to make a deal. And
here's Sergei Lavrov earlier today. I'm not sure where he is, where he's saying this, but it is today. Chris, cut number 18.
So bottom line, there's no meeting planned.
President Putin said clearly that he is ready to meet, provided this meeting is really going to have an agenda, presidential agenda.
So that's a big if. There's no meeting planned, Mr. Foreign Minister. That's a big if. You're saying there's no meeting planned right now.
Kristen, I'm awfully sorry, you're not listening. There is no meeting planned, and I'm not challenging this. But you cannot, I think, understand what I am saying. Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky when the agenda would be ready for a summit. And this agenda is not ready at all. President Trump suggested after Anchorage several points which we share, and on some of them we agreed to show some flexibility.
Okay.
When President Trump brought those issues to the meeting in Washington, with Zelensky present together with his European sponsors, he clearly indicated, it was very clear to everybody that there are several principles which Washington believes must be accepted, including no NATO membership, including the discussion of territorial issues. And Zelensky said no to everything. He even said no to, as I said, to canceling legislation prohibiting the Russian language. How can we meet with a person who is pretending to be a leader?
Ray, what is your read on that?
Well, they're putting the onus on Zelensky, clearly, there's an agreement between the U.S. and Russia. Look, it's over to Zelensky.
Right.
Putin has always said, in principle, I'm ready to talk to this guy, but my God, we have to be prepared. We have to make sure that they're not going to just diss everything we say. Now, those negotiations are already in progress. Let's remember that the Russians and the Ukrainians have met. There's some talk about raising the level of representation for those. That would be a good thing, like maybe Lavrov or somebody a little bit more senior than the fellow they have now. But, it's a dead end until Zelensky falls or is replaced or changes his attitude. Meanwhile, the facts on the ground continue to favor Russia. It's just a matter of weeks, in my view, before Russia could go to the Dnieper River, and they're holding that in the back. They're saying, Mr. Trump, we can do this. We can do this as fast as you decide, okay? But let's try to get a negotiated settlement so that we don't have to go all the way into the rest of Ukraine. Let's have something that will give us a measure of security for the future so they won't have to do this again.
Larry, is the Ukrainian foreign minister somebody that Lavrov would respect? Do we know who he is? Is he a person with a diplomatic standing? Would Lavrov sit down with him?
Lavrov would probably be more comfortable with Marco Rubio, but the problem for the Ukrainian foreign minister and the Russians approach this very, Putin's a lawyer, and I don't mean that as an insult to him, but okay, no, nor do you, Judge, but he, law, as you know, law school teaches you a certain way to think through issues and to approach things, and that's how Putin, he does approach the world that way. And one of the things he looks at is like, how can I send even, my foreign minister to sit down with a representative of a government that is illegal?
Right.
Because they have violated their own constitution. They've violated their own law. And when we reach an agreement, it's almost sort of, Putin is a bit naive in this regard. They really have believed in the past, as they did with Minsk II, that if we sign that agreement, we're going to be serious about keeping it. And then they keep finding out that the West says, we don't believe in those agreements.
Ray, if Vice President Vance is telegraphing what is likely to happen, and if President Trump does cut off any military supplies to Ukraine, isn't it well established that the Europeans are not financially in a position to fill the gap left by America?
That's exactly right. There's no question about that. So they're living in a land of illusion.
Right.
Hello?
Yes, they are living in a land of illusion. I agree with you.
Yeah. So Putin has got to convince them some way or another, perhaps by replacing or helping to replace, together with other services, replace Zelensky. He is the fly in the ointment, but as long as he persists in his negativism, the world looks on and says, look, the Russians and the U.S. now agree that this thing should be wound up. And they've agreed that there should be a comprehensive ceasefire, not a comprehensive agreement, not a temporary ceasefire. So what's holding this up? Zelensky is holding. Yeah. Will he hold up forever? Just so long as he loses his last Ukrainian to our great project Ukraine.
Well, Larry, the seven dwarfs, as Ray calls them, don't they understand that Russia will never accept NATO troops in Ukraine, no matter what you call them?
Yeah.
Americans in the sky, French on the ground, no matter what you call them. No military from those NATO countries is going to be in Western Ukraine with Russian consent.
Well, let me first say, as is typical of Ray, he chose a phrase that's both elegant and poetic. I call them the seven pimps. Because the relationship between them and Zelensky has more in common with prostitution. But Ray's right in raising the seven dwarfs, because it is a fairy tale what they're working on. Okay,
Larry, you're on a roll today. Keep it up.
The notion that these countries, where France, its current debt to GDP ratio, 110%. The UK's debt to GDP ratio, 100%. What that means for the folks who don't, not good with math out there, that means they're, in the UK's case, they're spending all the money they make in 1 month. And they do the same in each month. In France, they're spending more than they make, which means they're going into debt. And all of the economies, with the exception of Portugal, all the major economies in Europe right now are growing between 0.3% and 0%, which means a stagnation, a recession. And Portugal's growing at the rate of 1.5%, not fantastic. So they lack the economic power. They're facing enormous debt, and they're going to buy very expensive weapons with a 10% markup, according to Donald Trump, from the United States, and then they're going to give them to Ukraine. Ain't going to happen.
What are they going to use for cash? How are they going to pay for this?
They'll send Zelensky out to do personal favors.
Ray,
One other thing here to add.
please.
After the last NATO summit, conspicuously absent was any allusion to NATO membership. The year before, there was a big phrase and lots of talk about NATO membership. It said, Ukraine is on a path, on a irreversible path toward membership in NATO. Now, for that to be the feature of last year's NATO summit, and not even mentioned in this year's NATO summit, persuades me that the only person plumbing for a membership in NATO is a fellow named Zelensky. Not even the Europeans think this has any realistic possibility. That's why you have all this talk about alternative security guarantees.
Excellent, Ray. Larry, before we jump to Israel, why would Trump have offered American air power as a security guarantee, as if that is less offensive than American boots on the ground?
Yeah, it's not even clear. With the media reports, it's not even clear that he actually made that as a serious offer. And this, Lavrov, to his credit, very quickly shut down and shot down any idea that there would be this kind of a presence of NATO personnel or U.S. personnel or even U.S. aircraft allowed in that airspace. If you go back and look at the Istanbul agreement, that was at least the draft agreement from April of 2022, it was very explicitly laid out what actually at the time, the Ukrainians and the Russians had tentatively agreed on with respect to security guarantees. And there was absolutely no allowance for foreign troops to be based in Ukraine.
I know of no more effective way to introduce our discussion of the latest events in Gaza than a 2-minute clip from the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief at the UN. You may have seen it. It's a long clip. Chris edited it down. It's quite telling. Chris.
It is a famine. The Gaza famine. It is a famine that we could have prevented if we had been allowed. Yet food stacks up at borders because of systematic obstruction by Israel. It is a famine within a few hundred meters of food in a fertile land that forces a parent to choose which child to feed, that forces people to risk their lives to seek food. It is a famine that we repeatedly warned of, but that the international media has not been allowed in to cover, to bear witness. It is a famine in 2025, a 21st century famine, watched over by drones and the most advanced military technology in history. It is a famine openly promoted by some Israeli leaders as a weapon of war. Everyone owns this. The Gaza famine is the world's famine. It is a famine that asks, but what did you do? A famine caused by cruelty justified by revenge, enabled by indifference, and sustained by complicity. It is a famine that therefore also asks, and what now will you do? To Prime Minister Netanyahu and anyone who can reach him, enough. Ceasefire. Open the crossings, north and south, all of them. Let us get food and other supplies in, unimpeded. End the retribution. It is too late for far too many, but not for everyone in Gaza. Enough. For humanity's sake, let us in.
Ray, can you even reply to that? I know this guy is almost as eloquent as you are and almost as moving as you have been on this topic. I have goosebumps on my arms, and this is the third time I watched this clip today. Chris gave it to me a little while ago.
Judge, the question is, what can we do?
Right.
Medea Benjamin has an incredible clip addressed to her Jewish relatives and all the Jews in the United States to support the 21%, only 21% of the Israeli population that is at all troubled by forced starvation in Gaza. She's eloquent. We really need to do that. Now, the other thing is, how about us? Now, Aaron Bushnell, the Air Force person who self-immolated before the Israeli embassy a year and a half ago, said this. She said, look, I asked myself, what would I do if I were Nazi Germany? Or what would I do if I were during slavery? Well, the real question is, what am I doing now with genocide in Gaza? And I ask you the same question, says Aaron. You're doing it now. You're doing it now, or you're not doing it now. All of us are impelled not to be neutral on a question like this. To be neutral is to be on the side of the oppressor. And I have that directly from Bishop Tutu of South Africa.
Larry, Jeff Sachs calls Netanyahu the greatest monster on the planet right now. And it appears he is.
Yeah, I couldn't argue that at all. There is still a lot that nations can do. And I include in this China, Russia, India, all of Europe.
What can they do? You mean militarily?
No. Cut off all imports and exports, all trade between those countries and Israel. Stop the trade. Well, you saw the Russians actually made sort of an indirect move on Monday when they took out the Sokar oil terminal in Odessa, because that's owned by Azerbaijan and was a major supplier of oil to Israel. That oil terminal accounts for 15% of Azerbaijan's gross domestic product. So Israel really did send a message to Azerbaijan. So Israel's going to have to find some replacement for that. But seriously, if they are economically isolated, they can't stand. They can't continue. They will be forced to fold. And yet, so many of these countries, and including the United States and Europe, continue to trade with them and continue to allow them to, keep their unemployment numbers down and to have a functioning economy.
How do we get the message that has rocked the three of us and the thousands watching to the person who is funding all of this and who never says no to Netanyahu, President Trump?
We tell the world that we think President Trump is motivated not only by this slavish devotion to the interests of Israel, but also because Netanyahu has blackmail material on Trump in the Epstein files. Now, I speculated about that 3 weeks ago. Now we have some concrete evidence from a Mossad agent who handled Maxwell and his daughter and Epstein himself. And he said, look, there's stuff in there. Please, Mr. Trump, just release it. That way you can end the genocide. You can end the blackmail. It's very clear that there's something extra that Netanyahu has on Trump. We ought to educate the American people, because this is heinousness squared, okay? Heinousness in forced starvation and genocide, and prompted by the violation, the sexual predating, the violation of little girls. My God, we ought to need a we have to do something about that, to let people know, look, release those Epstein files and see what Trump is involved in. And then maybe this thing can be resolved when the blackmail material is no longer there.
Well, I think we'll end it at that. I still have goosebumps on my arms. This was just profound what he said. There is a longer version. I'll ask Chris to post both versions, but this is profound, articulate, eloquent, moving, and profound. Guys, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you at your usual.
Can I add a lace?
activity in Alaska, in Washington, D.C., in the hopes of bilateral and trilateral meetings, everything trying to get a diplomatic end to the war. One of the things we keep warning over and over is that without some changes in the Trump administration, he risks walking himself into a trap from which he may not be able to extract himself. And now then, as we drift further and further from Monday's meeting between Russia, Zelensky, and the European Union, that seems to be coming more and more to bear. If Trump doesn't change his position very quickly, we could be setting the stage here to an irreversible and irretrievable position to where Ukraine will simply lose the war, and there won't even be the possibility of any kind of diplomacy. Now, Trump yesterday was asked again in light of, because there's been a lot of time between the end of the meeting on Monday where there was a lot of enthusiasm and energy, at least on the Western side, that there was going to be a trilateral meeting between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky, which he said maybe there should be a bilateral first. And Trump, and you may remember Caroline Leavitt was asked, where did Trump come up with this idea? And he said, well, that's what President Putin told him. So the idea was, okay, well, it's been a bunch of days since then, and there's no announcement of any of that. In fact, we also saw Sergei Lavrov on American television just a couple of days ago was also asked about that. And there was a bit of a testy exchange between the anchor and Lavrov. And he said, listen, the bottom line is, let me reiterate, there is no meeting planned between Putin and Zelensky. If we can get some things settled at the working level and at the expert level, I think was the phrase he used, then we can start to talk about that, meaning that we are a long way from that. There's no trilateral or bilateral going to be coming anytime soon. So yesterday in the Oval Office, last evening, actually, President Trump was asked, where are we on that?
Have you talked to Vladimir Putin about the fact that yesterday a big U.S. factory was hit in a Russian airstrike in Ukraine? What's your reaction to that?
I told him I'm not happy about it, and I'm not happy about anything having to do with that war. I settled 7 wars, and actually, if you think about pre-wars, add 3 more, so it would be 10. I thought this would be in the middle of the pack in terms of difficulty. Now, I'm not happy about anything about that war. Nothing. Not happy at all. We'll see what happens. I think over the next 2 weeks, we're going to find out which way it's going to go. And I better be very happy.
And how long will you give Putin?
A couple of weeks. We're going to figure it out.
Yeah, we're going to figure it out in a couple of weeks. If that seems familiar to you, it is, because there's a lot of times where Trump has been saying that. And listen, when he talks about he's not happy, that's something he's been saying a lot too over the last couple of months. Every time whether it's a phone call he had with Putin, whether he sent Witkoff over there, or whether his own personal conversation, there's a lot of things that make me unhappy. And yet there's never any action that follows from that. So if you're Vladimir Putin and you hear how Trump is really unhappy, but nothing ever happens because of it, and he keeps picking up the phone the next time, then you certainly have to conclude that there's no incentive whatsoever for you to do anything different. Now, that's not to imply that the Lindsey Graham version of bone-crushing sanctions could get Russia's attention, because it can't. Russia continues to be willing to talk. And in fact, in all of these talks, Putin continues to say the same thing every time about the conditions they've been talking about since Istanbul in 2022. Also, that meeting in Istanbul this year, a few months, or back in July, I think it was. Gary keeps putting that 12-point plan up there, which is just a reiteration of what they said then and a restatement of what that one right there. Same thing that Putin said on 14 June 2024, and the same thing he's saying now. So he has been incredibly consistent with what they are and are not willing to do. And you see Trump, I don't know why you would be unhappy if they haven't changed anything, because Putin apparently, according to reports, keeps telling them, we still are willing to negotiate an end to this, but only with these conditions. And you may not like them, but I don't see where there's room for confusion on them. And yet that's kind of where we are. And so the problem is with Trump's method here is he keeps saying there's this time frame. I mean, we've talked about, of course, 24 hours, 100 days. Then there was on April 18th, we're days away from walking away. You remember Marco Rubio famously said that, implying that literally we're about ready to walk away, and was, by all appearances, was setting the stage for Trump to walk away. And then 2 weeks later on NBC News with Kristen Welker, Trump was asked again, are you ready to walk?
How long do you give both countries before you're going to walk away?
Well, there'll be a time when I will say, okay, keep going, keep being stupid.
When
and
does
keep
that
fighting.
come? Are you close to it?
Sometimes they get close to it and then positive things happen. Okay.
What's the red line for you? At what point do you say, that's it, we're walking away?
Well, you'll know. I mean, there'll be a time when I may say that. And if
But
I
you're
do,
not there.
there may be something I can't, maybe it's not possible to do. There's tremendous hatred, just so you understand. Kristen, we're talking tremendous hatred between these two men and between, some of the soldiers, frankly, between the generals. They've been fighting hard for 3 years. I think we have a very good chance of doing it.
Very quickly, if you do walk away, would that mean that you would pull military and intelligence?
I don't want to say
sharing
that now. It's too early to say that. I don't want to get into that argument.
Okay, so he said on May 4th, May, June, July, August, so more than 3 months ago, for those who want to use math, we like to do that a lot here. He said that, well, we're not quite there yet, but I am thinking about that. And he had said earlier in that same weeks, he again said, well, we'll probably know something in a couple of weeks. That's where he said that before. I said, you may remember that he said that. So that was following Rubio's comment that we're days away. Trump said, well, in a couple of weeks, we should know something. And then he had that interview there where he specified, well, we're close, but every time I think we're about ready to do something like that, something good happens, and then I delay, whatever. That's not good, folks, because everybody's watching that. Europe, Ukraine, Russia, everybody's watching. And when he makes those kinds of statements, that signals to people that he's malleable and that he can change his mind on a day. So why give anything that you don't want to do when tomorrow he may be more amenable to your position there and he's going to change? But they don't change. On the 18th of April and on the 4th of May, Russia's position was the same. On the 18th of April and the 4th of May, Ukraine's position was the same. The only thing that has changed is America's position to change. Because remember, during those multiple timelines when we're given there, Trump's objectives changed. First, he just said he wanted the war resolved, in 24 hours and 100 days. He didn't say how, he just wanted it resolved. And then when that, famous 50-day ultimatum came out, that was expressly to get an unconditional 30-day ceasefire or there would be hell to pay. And then it was 10 days, and then it was no days, and there was never any hell to pay. And then now that the whole idea just went off the table. And then he changed his mind again and said, now then, we're basically taking the Russian position that all we're trying to do is look at the root causes first, and then we'll have a ceasefire. Literally what Russia's been saying from the beginning. So the sides see that Trump is malleable and that his deadlines never mean anything for anyone. And if you're talking about trying to compel disparate forces and sides and something to bring them together so that there can be some kind of unified ending. And when people see that you change your position depending on what day of the week it is and how you feel that morning, they're not going to give in on anything, because there's a reasonable purpose for them behind to say, hey, if we just hang on a little bit longer, then we're going to get the thing that we want. Because you can see, I mean, it's playing out right in front of our faces here. You have the Ukraine and Europe are virtually locked in. They're virtually identical, and they also have been. And obviously Russia has been consistent with it. And so everybody is trying to compel Trump to do things they want. Everybody has realized, and we see this playing out almost every time there's a meeting, is that everybody knows that to get Trump to do something you like, you have to flatter him. You have to do something nice for him. You have to brag on how he's the only one that could have brought these people together, all this kind of stuff. And this incredible leadership, which you see Ukraine and Europe do all the time, thanking Trump, expressing all kinds of fealty to him, etc. But behind the scenes, and when you look at it, the brass tacks, they're not actually changing anything. They're just trying to sweet talk him, as is the Vladimir Putin. He's doing the same kind of thing. And you see Trump, depending on what day of the week it is, he's kind of moving all over the place while the other ones don't. Now then we're at a point to where we get into some of the brass tacks, and it gets a little bit more potentially serious for the United States, because one thing up to in the first nearly 6 months of this process, where Trump never mentioned anything about, and certainly, well, what he mentioned about NATO was there wasn't going to be any for Ukraine, but there wasn't definitely going to be any kind of security guarantees from the United States, except now maybe there is. And so now then, when you're talking about potential security guarantees, then the devil is in the details big time, and even more so in the definitions. What does Ukraine mean when it says security guarantees? What does Russia mean when it says security guarantees? And then what does the United States mean when it comes to security guarantees? And that is one of the things I want to camp on here for just a second, because when you look at what the Europeans are saying, they're saying security guarantees is this coalition of the willing. It's Western troops on the ground inside of Ukraine. And when you see Zelensky, of course, he's saying security guarantees are a big Ukrainian armed forces that is trained and armed to the teeth, going out forward into the future, and a coalition of the willing on his territory. That's what he thinks. And on the Russian side, what they have said is that they want the most that they will go for is, they say they want a United Nations Security Council grouping, the members of the permanent members of the UNSC. Maybe they can provide something, but of course that would include Russia and China. More on that in a minute. But let's see. But there's actually a flank attack, if you will, on Trump, because it's not just the Europeans and the Ukrainians and the Russians who are trying to manipulate him. Also in his rear and his flank, he has others in the United States that don't like any of the things that he says about just ending the war on any terms favorable to Russia. And that includes on these security guarantees. And here's a couple of well-known people in the United States that are on TV all the time. And for some reason, people keep listening to them, I guess, just because they look and they see, oh, retired 4-star general, or in this case, a 3-star general. We'll start with Ben Hodges.
I personally would support the idea of American troops being part of some sort of a ceasefire enforcement or security guarantee. I've always thought Ukraine should be in NATO. But the first question will still remain, what is the mission? Let's say the president agrees to American troops being a part of this security force, security agreement. What's their task? Where will they be? What do you want them to do, and what are the rules of engagement? And I think the Kremlin, if they see that troops are out there, but they don't have capability, they don't have the right rules of engagement, then it will not be a credible guarantee.
Okay, so I'm obviously against any kind of security guarantees in any form, even if it's just on paper, for the United States on behalf of Ukraine potentially fighting Russia. 100% against that. But I do give General Hodges props here, because he is asking the right questions. What's the mission? What do you want to use American troops? Because Trump, apparently, depending on who you ask and what day of the week it is, he's like, well, maybe not boots on the ground, or at least not boots on the front line, but maybe air power. But then again, there also may be some troops, training and doing intelligence support, et cetera, in Ukraine. So he's kind of, I don't know, it depends on, again, who you ask. But that's some of the things that are at least being contemplated by there. So Hodges rightly asked, and the President Trump should answer, what would they be doing specifically? What would be the rules of engagement? Are you prepared that if there is a missile strike, and we just saw an American electronics firm in Ukraine was hit with a missile strike, and that got blown up. So what happens if in the future if we have some kind of an agreement? More on that in a minute, because the chances are virtually impossible that Russia would agree to anything that is being contemplated in the West. But theoretically, let's say that it was, and that somehow they found a way to agree to it, and there are American troops there, and a missile strike hits and kills them. Now what? What are you going to do then? Are you prepared to take the United States to war with nuclear-armed Russia because they get hit, or would you not? Would you allow them to be killed and not go to war with the nuclear-armed Russia? You see that there's a no-win situation here. Any potential idea that you could have troops in there, all it could do is potentially drag you into a war. It's not going to deter Russia. It's not going to prevent them from doing anything. It just leaves a wide open the possibility that because your troops are there and that something goes wrong, whether it's a miscalculation, an error, an accident, a misidentification, you name it, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. And now then you would be forced in that situation with, what do you do now? Do you defend the rights and the lives of your troops and now use lethal force directly against Russian forces, in which case you're nearly by definition at war? Or would you say, well, that's stupid, we're not going to go to nuclear war, and then you just let your guys die for no reason? Then why are they there? You see what I'm saying? This is the same dynamic we have with all these troops we've got scattered throughout the Middle East right now. They're not preventing Iran from doing anything. They're not preventing the Houthis from doing anything, etc. But by being there, they're a strategic vulnerability that could draw us into a war if they get killed. And that did happen in 2023. I think it was late 23, early 24, when some of American troops were killed in Jordan by some of these violent groups, some of these religious violent groups that were aligned with Iran. And that had the potential to actually draw us into a conflict. Thank God it didn't. But there was the fact that we even had to worry about it was foolish, because it should never have happened. And those troops shouldn't have sacrificed their lives. They should still be alive today. That still exist over there, because we still have troops in the region that remain to be a point of vulnerability. But now then we're talking here. So Hodges is right. We need to ask those hard questions, but others don't want to ask the hard questions. In fact, Brother Jack Keane, that we like to trot out a lot because he's the mouthpiece of the so-called elite foreign policy thinking in Washington, D.C. That's why he's so popular. He doesn't want to ask any questions. He just says, yeah, this is something, folks, we have to do.
You sent me this rough outline of what you think should happen for security guarantees. And you say the Ukraine provides security guarantees, and this is what it would look like. Command and control, intelligence, logistics, brigade task force on the ground providing training to Ukrainian forces. So until we can get international forces there, you think we should be there in Ukraine?
Yeah, we have to be. I mean, the president hasn't made any decisions on this. The chairman is working this with the chief of defenses of the countries that want to support. The national security advisor, dual-hatted Marco Rubio, Secretary of State and national security advisor, is working with the countries involved. Eventually, options will come to the president. We can move forces we already have in Europe to provide assistance in Ukraine. I'm telling you straight out, the Europeans do not have the capability to provide command and control of the majority of the forces. Should be Euros on the ground.
Okay, let's start with the end of that. So hang on just a second. You were saying categorically that the entire European contingent of NATO, instead of providing this bulwark of this powerful military, the most powerful military alliance in the history of mankind, can't even do communications without the United States? Like, they are so dependent on us? I mean, I don't know if that's true, or if you just want it to be true, and so you're just saying it because you want to keep Europe dependent on the United States. I guess that's the net result, because it sure appears that these European leaders, all of them, are subordinate and subservient to the American president, whoever it happens to be at any given time, and certainly to Trump right now. That alone should alarm us. We should be saying, hang on. So the entire NATO depends only on the United States for any capacity? They can't even fight? They can't even do a security council or a security guarantee mission, a peacekeeping mission without the United States providing communications? I mean, what the hell, man? What is going on? What are the Germans doing? What are the French doing? They boast all the time, especially UK, boast all the time that they're ready to go to war with Russia. They're ready to go to war with China. All of their 75,000 ground troops, which is a pathetically small number. When you're talking about either China or Russia, it's a blip. And yet they're so cocky and talking about that. But now you're trying to tell me, but they can't do any mission without the United States first? Folks, listen, that by itself is a red flag. The United States, 80 years after the end of Second World War, should not be the only thing that allows the continent of Europe to defend itself. It is way past time that they need to stand on their own and provide their own security like we provide our own security. We have a national security and an armed forces that is designed to defend the interest of the United States and defend our borders from attack, and if attacked, to fight and win wars, at least on paper. You know my feelings on that we're actually not ready to do that. But anyway, that's the mission. That's what we're supposed to do. And so we have a defense budget to meet that. Whether it's some 3.5% or 5%, whatever we're asking NATO to do, that's not the big issue. The big issue is that you need to define, and by the way, this is actually a part of the 1949 treaty. The Washington Treaty that established NATO said that each individual member must provide for their own national security, and then the collective will make it all stronger. That is not happening. It hasn't happened in decades. They don't provide for their own national security. And now you hear Jack Keane confess it on television. Yeah, they can't even have a conversation, but we want all the main ground troops to be Euros, is in his phrasing. And that's a big red flag right there. So let's keep that red flag planted, and then let's look at another red flag. This one is on our side. So both Keane and Hodges need to answer this question. Why? What is the imperative national security threat to the United States that we should risk our national treasure and the blood of our men and women and risk nuclear war with the nuclear-powered Russia because of what may or may not happen in Ukraine? Why? Why would you want to risk that? Meaning, right now, we're not at risk. Our troops are not at risk. Our country is not at risk, but you want to put them at risk. So you owe to every American that was listening to your words, whether that video or on television, explain to them what the prevailing national security threat is to the United States that would necessitate those kinds of resources and that kind of risk being taken by our country. There's not one. You can come up with, you can just use words and say, oh, well, they may come after us. Okay, how? Because then there's a question there too. How will Russia come after us? How will Russia threaten the United States? Same for actually France. You saw in Colonel Jacques Beau in our show yesterday. He said that their version of a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, their senior ranking military advisor, apparently told their president Macron that within 5 years Russia would be ready to attack Europe and come for France. Okay, how? Where is the massive, and I mean massive, forces that Russia would have to have today? I mean, you would have to have it already right now. And if you want to build up for something that's going to happen in 5 years, you don't just get that on the fly. Where is the formation of this massive force that's going to roll across Romania, across Poland, all the other countries that are kind of in between France and the Russian border? How do you even say that's even possible? Because for the moment, let's say that there are no nuclear weapons, and this is like 1938, and German troops were potentially going to roll across. They had a massive force. They had a massive industrial capacity, and they had the massive logistical lines and all of that, and a Navy and an Air Force, a powerful, all that stuff they had. Where's it on the Russian side? Look, you often mock the Russians. because after 3.5 years of war, they have still taken hardly any of the physical territory. And you see how long it's taken them to take the one medium-sized town of Pokrovsk. And you think that they're going to roll across countries in a few years to come to against France? I mean, that's obviously absurd at face value. It can't be both, folks. Russia can't be this pathetic thing that can't take Ukraine, and simultaneously, oh my God, they're coming for us in Paris. Those things can't coexist, and they don't. It's just words. It means nothing. There's no fundamental reality on the ground to back this up. So when you have Hodges and when you have Keene and all of those they represent saying that we have to provide security guarantees for Ukraine, no, we don't. There is no reason on God's earth to risk America getting drawn into a war, potentially a nuclear war with Russia over anything that happens in Ukraine. If there's any logical and defendable position you want to have, let's strengthen the fortification of the eastern boundary of NATO, because we're already in that situation. And in fact, you saw what Russia did with its Surovikin lines in 2023. It just broke the teeth of the best that we had to muster with the Ukrainian army and all of the Western equipment. It just broke its teeth on those lines. And now you see Russia genuinely is having a hard time getting through the Ukrainian lines. But because of all the inputs they have, they are still getting it done. And there's no reason to think that will ever change in Ukraine. But if that's the case, and if it's that difficult, then you should be building fortifications on the NATO side of that, if you're really worried about it. And I don't think they are. And I think Colonel Bowe also mentioned this, and others on our show have. If you actually think that Russia is a threat to roll over you, then you're going to be on a massive military buildup. You're going to get your armed forces higher. You're going to have a tripling of your industrial capacity to start building all the armaments of war, all the components, especially artillery shells, air defense missiles, air offense missiles, all of those kinds of things. Where is it? Where is it? Instead, they're talking this gradual kind of decade-long military buildup of, up to 3.5% that they're going to inch their way up to in some number of years, well off into the distant future. Nobody believes, when you look at actions, they don't actually believe Russia's coming for there. But you put troops on the ground anywhere inside Ukraine, especially if the Russians don't agree to it, we're going to have some potential for a war that we wouldn't be ready for. If something like that to happen, Russia does have the capacity to fight a sustained war at that level in Ukraine right now. We don't. So if the thing did spill, Russia would be in a world of hurt, because we do have lots of, powerful air forces. We have lots of naval forces, et cetera, and numbers wise, a lot of troops, but they're not ready for war and they can't sustain anything. So we can have a really big blow for a while, and then we're out, folks. You understand that? We would be out because we can't sustain it. It wouldn't matter at that point how many tanks, planes, and aircraft you have. It would only matter how much ammunition you have. And in a war that would be big like that, we can't sustain it. Russia can. Let's don't put ourselves into that position to find out. Well, meanwhile, like I mentioned at the beginning here, you have all the players, but especially Zelensky, who keeps trying to coerce Trump into his side. And he keeps saying stuff like, well, he's going to say in this clip that I'm about to show here that, you know what, we're all together in this and we're of one mind on what we need to do.
Europe and America are united in this effort. As I stated earlier, that is a fact. This is the beginning of a major undertaking, and it is far from simple. Security guarantees consist of what our partners can provide to Ukraine, and also of what kind of army Ukraine must maintain, and where we can find the capacity to preserve the strength of our armed forces. Let me illustrate how complex this is with one example. When we speak about aircraft, specifically F-16 fighter jets, we are deeply grateful to all our partners for their coordination and for helping us establish an air fleet, or at least the beginning of one. We do not yet have all the aircraft we need, but we know that the current number is insufficient to guarantee air security. There is a specific quantity required, which I am not yet ready to disclose.
Scammer.
But it is essential that we are all aligned and that our partners share this understanding.
So you have Zelensky basically saying we're all of one mind. And so he's trying to convince Trump that we're all in the same mind on this and we're on the same team, right? I mean, because here we are, because he keeps saying this stuff over and over. Security guarantees of his definition, which he has specifically said does not include demilitarization. So in his mind, security guarantees means I have a strong national defense to be able to provide my own security, which we would get by growing our armed forces and getting ammunition, weapons, tanks, planes, and all that stuff from the West indefinitely. And of course, denazification is not even on the table for contemplation. He doesn't even worry about getting rid of that because obviously he's going to keep being the president. He has stood for election. He's long gone past his initial term and continues to say, well, we have the national emergency. And so as long as there's martial law, we are not allowed to have an election, whatever, but you're the one that controls that. So especially if there's any kind of willingness, and you claim that there is, that even if it's just the line of contact, the current line of contact, they ain't coming back into your country. And even in your telling, they're not. You're more like what's going to be left, and you want the line to stop where it's at. So then if that's the case, then you can have an election right now. You could have already had one in the areas where you control, because that's all you're going to control. There's no scenario, not even the one from the Europeans, in which people on the other side of the line of contact would be able to vote in a Ukrainian election. So that tells you that he will stay in power as long as he wants, and he'll just declare, I think it's every 90 days or something like that, as he has been, reinstating the martial law, and he'll just keep not having to stand for election. He'll keep being president. And so we'll see where it's going to go with that. But that's what he's saying. That is all categorically opposite of what the Russians are saying they're willing to contemplate. So again, you go back all to this diplomatic fury of activity, but nobody's changing their positions. And it's interesting. We talk about the security guarantees, and that's the version of the U.S., Europe, and Ukraine side. But what nobody in the West even wants to contemplate is the security guarantees that Russia is asking for. And as we're going to see in this short clip here on Fox News, the anchor literally and physically laughs at the idea that Russia has any kind of valid position.
I think the most crazy one of all is that Putin, the aggressor in this whole scenario, wants to be one of the peacekeeping forces, bringing its troops into Ukraine to prevent an invasion from Russia. I mean, how crazy is that?
Yeah, I think this is sort of posturing, right? This is an opening salvo, hopefully a real negotiation for peace between Zelensky and Putin. And President Trump has opened that door by the events of last week, in Alaska, and then earlier this week at the White House when the European leaders were in the Oval Office. And President Trump's the only person in the world that can open this door. And we're going to see where it goes. Diplomacy isn't easy, but I'm glad we have a president that's willing to try. I think he's the peace president. That's his instinct. That's his North Star. And so hopefully these folks can get in the room and hammer out a peace deal and end the killing.
Okay, look, I mean, aside from lathering up Trump, it's just like a routine thing. Everybody, whatever, the first thing they do is talk about this brilliant leadership of Trump because they're just trying to lather him up. Enough of that already. Just talk about the substance. Sorry, it's kind of a point that it irks me. But let's look at the substance of what he's saying here. Yes, the Russians are just posturing. Okay, it doesn't matter if you think they should have security guarantees or if they have security concerns on their border. They do. So if you actually want a diplomatic end, which Senator Schmidt there said that, yeah, that's what we got to do. It's not easy, whatever. If you're in a negotiation and diplomacy, there are two sides. And if you don't even consider one of the major participants of this, then you have this much chance of actually getting a settlement. There's not a chance. If you don't even consider the Russian side, then there is you don't even going to agree to any of their terms. Ergo, the only thing you will leave them left is to continue fighting. And as I keep telling over and over, the power dynamics between the two sides is off the charts in the favor of the Russian side. And there is nothing that the Ukraine and the European and the American side combined can do to flip that dynamic, especially when you find out that the manpower contingent has been so utterly eviscerated throughout the country of Ukraine. They just don't have it, no matter how many. Even if miraculously you did come up with the bombs and bullets and planes and all that stuff, you don't have the manpower to use it. So there is no logical, rational position that the West can have that we can hold out and demand that Russia change their mind. They're not going to, because they recognize they do have a point of view, they do have valid security concerns, and they have the power to compel compliance on the other side. So we keep going down this path, and we are guaranteeing there won't be a diplomatic solution. And by extension, we're guaranteeing that the Ukraine side will eventually be ground to dust and defeated militarily. Much more blood could be spilled, much more territory than just the 4 administrative borders of these oblasts that we're talking about now. Congratulations. Well played, Senator Schmidt. Well played, America. Well played, Jack Keane, Ben Hodges, et al. That's what you guys are collectively producing. Of course, we have to add Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz. We're adding all those guys into it because they are all participants on the destruction of the Ukrainian manpower pool and their physical country. Well played. But whether you want to or not, whether you care or not, Russia does have a point of view, and they have not been shy about sharing it. Here is Sergei Lavrov explaining how they view the European plan for security guarantees as compared to their own.
As for reports that Britain, France, and Germany want to develop collective security guarantees, we are in favor of these guarantees being truly reliable. Here we have a good example, which relates to an initiative of the Ukrainian side itself. This was the case in Istanbul in April 2022, when the Ukrainian negotiating team proposed the basic principles for agreements on ending hostilities and ensuring a sustainable settlement. Among these principles was Ukraine's refusal to join NATO or any other military blocs, and the confirmation of Ukraine's neutral and non-nuclear status. In this context, the Ukrainian side proposed, and our delegation then agreed, to develop security guarantees, the participants of which would be all permanent members of the United Nations Security Council.
Okay, in case you're counting, all permanent members of the United Nations Security Council forming one big peacekeeping force would not just include France, Britain, and the United States, but also China and Russia. So, and if you think, well, that's crazy. Oh, wait a minute. China is signaling its readiness to send peacekeepers to Ukraine. And actually, when you look at some Chinese media today, they reiterate that same thing. Apparently, this is being considered on their side. Gary, if you can throw that full screen up there. This is from Global Times, which is the official Chinese Communist Party approved media outlet in English. And they're saying that without China and its guarantees, lasting peace in any part of the world is immensely difficult, said Lukashenko from Belarus. And if you scroll up there a little bit, Gary, I want to read that first paragraph there because it's really instructive. It says, following Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's claim that Ukraine does not need China as a guarantor providing security guarantees, no kidding, Belarusian President Lukashenko said that the responsibility to avoid war was his own, and quote, without China, a permanent Security Council member, and its guarantees securing a lasting peace in any part of the world is immensely difficult. Zelensky should think carefully before speaking so carelessly. So that's what he said at that time. So that tells you that Russia's going, yeah, cool, security guarantees, I'm good with that as long as everybody's security is guaranteed. So what they're proposing, incidentally, is so wherever the lines end up getting drawn, let's say that it's the administrative borders of the 4 oblasts, let's say that that's what it is, or that's by some theoretical possibility, the West convinces that Russia, that it's the current line of contact only, minus the Donbass. Apparently that's being kicked around. I doubt seriously that Russia will settle for anything less territorially than the full administrative borders. But regardless, wherever the line ends up, Russia's saying, okay, there will be, and some have even agreed to this on the Western side, some sort of like a DMZ kind of situation, like you have between North and South Korea, demilitarized zone that would run. Some say it could be upwards of 20 kilometers wide. And in between that, then you would put a peacekeeping force to keep the two sides away from each other. And so Russia's saying, yeah, it ain't just going to be NATO members. I mean, because that's not keeping any peace from us. You're on their side already. From the Russian perspective, you put only European troops in there or American also. That is the alliance that's already allied and physically providing capacity for Ukraine to kill Russians. So that's not a peacekeeping force from the Russian side. That's adding more combatants, enemy combatants, into the calculation. So they'll never agree to that. What they're proposing instead is the UNSC. So sure, there can be Britain, there can be French, there can even be American troops in there. That's cool as long as some of them are Russian and Ukraine troops. Russian troops are already there, so that's actually not adding anything, but you add Chinese troops in there. And NATO is already, itchy and twitchy to add China into its potential enemy list already. And they're talking about going into the Indo-Pacific area and helping out with that, et cetera. So they're the pacing threat, et cetera. The idea that they would ever agree to allow Chinese troops to physically come on European soil and act as peacekeepers, they make their heads blow up. Russia knows that. Of course they know that. So they're not willing to say, we're going to just have only the enemy troops that are already allied against us, their countries, only have them on there. They're not going to agree to that. And so they're saying, how about our ally, China, providing some of that? And of course, the Europeans are not going to agree to that. I can't even imagine that there's any serious consideration to that, at least not yet. With enough pain, lots of things become possible in the future, but so far, that's just they would mock that, and there has been some mocking. Zelensky apparently himself has said, "Yeah, we don't need that." Yeah, I bet you don't want that. But see, but we have no problem expecting Vladimir Putin to take something that is only to his disadvantage. And as Putin has said very recently after the Anchorage meeting, he's not doing that either.
I want to note right away that the visit was timely and very useful. We discussed practically all areas of our interaction, but first and foremost, of course, we spoke about the possible resolution of the Ukrainian crisis on a fair basis. And naturally, we had the opportunity, which we took, to discuss the genesis, the root causes of this crisis. It is precisely the elimination of these root causes that should form the basis of a settlement. It has been a long time since we have engaged in direct negotiations of this kind at such a level. I repeat once again, there was an opportunity to calmly and thoroughly reiterate our position. We, of course, respect the position of the American administration as well, which sees the need for a swift cessation of hostilities. Well, we would also like that and would prefer to move toward resolving all issues by peaceful means. The conversation was very frank, substantive, and, in my opinion, it brings us closer to the necessary decisions.
And yet, as Russia has said all the way through this very consistently, we prefer to have the settlement by peaceful means, as Putin said there. But as Ambassador Nebenzia said in, I think it was late May, but we will get it on the battlefield if we don't accomplish it through negotiations. They're unambiguous and open about that. Russia has been very clear and very open about where its position is. And now you see they've added clarity on this whole issue of security guarantees. Categorically, they're willing to discuss it, but only if it's, as Putin said there, a fair resolution. So it means that both sides have to be able to do something. The fact that Russia is willing to have American, French, and British soldiers as part of a contingent, but only if their ally, China, is also part of that contingent. Now, to somebody who's not directly connected with this, you would say that seems pretty fair, because neither side, Russia wouldn't want the American, British, and French soldiers on there, but they're willing to tolerate them as long as it's mixed in with their ally. Meanwhile, you have the American side say, yeah, we only want our guys there, none of your guys there, and trust us, we're not going to be doing anything in the future. And then, of course, that the last part that Putin mentioned there, that gets us closer to relevant decisions and important decisions. That is another one of the things that the Russians have never gone away from, and that is a demilitarization and a denazification, according to their definition. I just can't see any scenario where Russia's going to say, okay, it's the territory on the ground. It's where the map is. But we'll leave Zelensky and all those who led to this war from the Russian perspective starting in the first place. We'll just leave them all in place, and I guess we'll just trust this peacekeeping force. That's a prospect for what John Mearsheimer has said on our show, what he defines as a frozen conflict. Frozen in the sense that you have agreed to certain things, lines on the conflict, but none of the fundamentals that led to the conflict are solved or resolved or agreed to any kind of resolution. And so you have this constant friction, which means the conflict itself stays on a knife's edge. It doesn't appear that Russia is willing to do that. Russia appears to be saying what we want and what we will insist upon is a resolution of the root causes of this war so that there are no friction points and there's no reason for any conflict to break out in the future. We kind of want that, but only from the sense that we want Russia defeated. And that's what we've been trying to do from the beginning. Well, that's not going to happen. It was never going to be possible, but the subsequent years have rendered that a physical and psychological impossibility. You just can't do it because now then Russia has too many men, too many trained men, too big of a capacity for industrial to sustain a long-term conflict if it's necessary. We don't have it. We don't have the manpower we're not going to give our manpower to Ukraine, and Ukraine itself doesn't have the manpower to sustain a conflict. So Russia can see in a war of attrition, even if it takes territory by slow numbers. And you saw also that Colonel Jacques Beau brought up that Russians, when it was General Surovikin was the commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces in 2022, I think late 22, openly stated, our objective is the destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces more than taking territory. And that's why they were willing to cede a pretty big chunk of the Kherson province in Kherson city in the south, because that ultimately wasn't the most important thing. He needed to preserve his armed forces to be able to inflict a strategic defeat on the Ukrainian armed forces. And that's what they've been doing methodically and very slowly over the preceding 2.5 years from that point. That's kind of where we are right now. So where does that leave Trump? And what do we have the possibility of going forward? Well, what you have is, let's go back since Trump came into office and he had that big blow up with Zelensky in his office, in the Oval Office, in front of God and country on the national broadcast television, the explosion between the two sides. Zelensky has never changed his position from that side. He did not come to Trump's side. He did not waver in anything. He uses flattery with Trump a lot. He uses some of the words Trump uses, but he is ironclad. And you saw in the clip we showed from just yesterday, he is still where he was then. European Union, they're still where they were when Trump came into power. They want security guarantees. They want a coalition of the willing. They want no territorial given up. They want, and Ursula von der Leyen said this week, very verbatim, specifically, no reduction in their military at all. She emphasized that at all, no change at all. Certainly no denazification. So European Union is exactly where they were when he came into office. He has not been able to sway them anyway. And then on the other side, you have Russia, where they were, not just when he came into office, but going back to even before the war, at the beginning of the war, all the way through. So all the parties are where they were when Trump came in. So I think that, unfortunately, the likely scenario is that all of this flurry of diplomatic activity we've had going back to Anchorage all the way up through the Oval Office earlier this week is going to be seen as just that. It's just going to be a blip on the screen. Because Trump said yesterday, we showed you that comment that he made there about, I'm not happy, and I better be happy when this stuff happens and we get this stuff solved. But he has shown no ability to actually move anyone. He hasn't moved Zelensky to say, yes, I'm willing to cede the administrative orders, because that's what it's going to take. There's going to have to be a reduction in our armed forces. No movement whatsoever, not even addressing that. Trump basically is if anything, he's closer to their view that we'll try and just freeze it on the line of contact. But that's not acceptable to the Russian side. And when it gets down to it, which side can compel? Because that's where it always comes down to. You can have propaganda, you can have spin left and right. But on the battlefield, spin and propaganda don't have any currency. It only matters what you can do and what you can't do. And let's see, what can the Western side writ large, U.S., Europe, and Ukraine. What can they do and what can't they do? They can't demand that Russia submit to their terms. They can ask it, they can hope for it, but they cannot compel Russia to do that. What they also can't do is win militarily. There is no capacity to do it. Manpower, equipment, armaments, any of that. Defense industrial. They simply don't have the capacity to do it. So they can't. On the other side, what Russia can do is compel compliance with its terms, that there will be demilitarization, there will be denazification, there will be the administrative borders of those 5 territories, of those 4 territories, and also including Crimea, of course. They can compel compliance on that. And if that is not given, then they can simply continue the fight. They can continue doing what they're doing. Their air power is continuing to increase. We've seen their Air Force itself is inflicting much stronger and much consistent weapons destruction on the front line, on the ground. Their strategic air power with this Garin drones and the missiles that they have, hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, etc. These things continue to get through, and they just have more of them than the Ukraine side does air defense. So even if the reports are true that Ukraine is shooting down large percentages of them, I have doubts about that, especially when you see the videos of the destruction. But even if that were true, it's still Russia has more of them than the Ukraine side does, and every reason to think that that production is reported going to go up substantially beyond what it was. You may recall last month we showed you some satellite imagery of a massive factory complex that's in the process of being constructed. Russia hasn't slowed down on building their industrial capacity. It's increasing. So there's every reason in the world to think that in time, Russia will be able to either compel compliance at the negotiating table, or they'll physically take it on the battlefield with no concerns about what anybody thinks on the West. That's where we are. The reality is, and if Trump was looking at reality, he would recognize those things on the ground, and they're pretty straightforward. And then he would compel Ukraine and the Europeans to his version and say, you either agree to what I'm willing to agree to with Putin, what I can get him to agree to, and it's all those terms I just mentioned. As ugly as they are, it would end the war. It would preserve some amount of political autonomy for the Ukrainians. There would still be a rump Ukraine. Or he can continue on with the path he's going and trying to achieve the unattainable, and basically be a standby and watching helplessly as Russia moves to the West. That's where we are, folks. So Trump is now in a position that he's painted himself into, to where he has some leverage against the Europeans and the Ukrainians, but he won't wield it. He doesn't have any leverage over the Russians. And every time he tries to, by having these, dates that come up and claims of what's going to happen if they don't, and he's unhappy, and there's going to be bone-crushing sanctions, all those kinds of things. But he knows that if he tries to do this, there's the higher chances that it harms us economically, and it won't have any impact on the Russians. If anything, it'll harden their resolve. So he has to, I think he does understand that part. So now then he's at the specter, at this place right now. He gave himself a couple of weeks of wiggle room here. In those couple of weeks, he still has a shot at using his leverage on the only people that he has leverage over, and that's on our side, to bring it into the war on terms that would be acceptable to the Russians. If he doesn't, then he's going to be seen in history, and I'm talking even now, forget about long term, but even right now, he'll be seen as the guy that couldn't bring Zelensky to heel. He never was able to bring Zelensky to his side, that he hasn't been able to get the Europeans to do what he wants, that they haven't changed any of their positions, and he couldn't make them change it. All of those things on that side. And then for all of his desires, and he keeps curiously claiming that he solved all these multiple decade-long wars, and he's just really good at it, and then yet he couldn't get Russia to change from any of their core requirements. So then he's literally powerless among all the sides. And I mean, they'll keep trying to spin it, I suppose, but it's only going to go so far. And if the physical reality on the battlefield proves out, and this could take a long time, this is not, I think that it could come quickly, because the Ukrainian armed forces, I think, is more brittle than many recognize, and we just never know that. But there could be a collapse at some point. We already have the number of Ukraine troops is shrinking because they can't force mobilize a lot, and of course the casualties they're suffering and the desertions are at astronomical rates on the battlefield. We've seen that from Ukraine reporting, not from Russian side, and you see all that together. There's just no way to get around this. That's how it's going to work out. And if it does, then you won't be able to spin it anymore. If this is all taken by Russia, whether that's 3 months or 2 years, they're eventually going to get there. And you can talk all you want, but it'll be self-evident for even the biggest ardent supporters of Trump. They'll see you were powerless both at home and abroad. And that's not going to be good for anything else that Trump wants to get done. I mean, even just politically, you're talking about the 2026 midterms coming up. That's not going to play well, because things should be going a lot worse by that time. And his political opponents will no doubt seize upon that and highlight his incapacity and all of his, like this senator we showed you a minute ago, Schmidt, all these supporters of, oh yeah, we think it's a great idea. And then if it ends up collapsing, it'll certainly be seized upon there. So Trump has some motivation to change, but he's only got a couple of weeks window, which he's provided for himself this time. And if he doesn't, he's setting himself up. He's setting Ukraine up, and he's setting the Western alliance up for some really bad outcomes. And we'll just have to wait and see how that works out. That's where it's heading, though. The last thing I want to talk about, though, is related. But there was in that same Oval Office meeting I started the show with, where you saw Trump talking about how he was unhappy and was giving him a couple of weeks, et cetera. He also trotted out this gift that he had gotten from somebody, which raised a lot of eyebrows.
And I was just sent a picture from somebody that wants to be there very badly. He's been very respectful of me and of our country, but not so respectful of others. But I'm going to sign this for him, but I was sent one, and I thought you'd all like to see it. That's a man named Vladimir Putin, who I believe will be coming, depending on what happens. He may be coming, and he may not, depending on what happens. We have a lot of things happening over the next couple of weeks. But I thought it was a nice picture of him. Okay of me, but nice of him. So that was very nice that it was sent to me. Okay.
Why do you want to? Why would you pull up a picture? I mean, he's acting like some kid who got a picture from his hero or something. And it's a very nice picture, and he just kept on showing it over and over. And I'm going to sign it and send it back to him because he thinks it's really cool. I mean, you're trying to negotiate an end to a war with this guy. You're trying to show that you're tough against him, and that you're trying to push the envelope and to get as much as you can for your side. I mean, that's supposed to be the image you want to portray, but instead it's the opposite. It makes it look like you want him to be your buddy, or that he is your buddy, etc. That doesn't help Trump in any way. It doesn't help him, certainly with Ukraine. I'm sure that they're just aghast by that. It doesn't help you with the European Union, because they're going, what the hell? And it doesn't help you with Putin, because it makes Putin think, got you where I want you. And he'll keep saying nice things about Trump. He'll keep lathering him up. He'll keep bragging on him and talk about how we're so happy that we have somebody in the White House that we can finally talk to, et cetera, and just facilitate that. That's why he sent him the picture in the first place. It had the effect that he wanted to, and you see Trump sitting there. That makes Trump less willing to push back on Putin, and it undermines his position with our side here, because it just draws contempt from a lot of them. That was a bad look, and something that he probably shouldn't have done, but damage is kind of done on that. You can't walk that one back there, because you're standing right there in the Oval Office at the Resolute desk, and it is what it is. But it's not helpful, and that just kind of really underscores what I've been talking about this whole time, that he cannot compel Putin to do what he wants, and he can't coerce our own side. And this just didn't help. That's where we are right now, folks. Next week's a new week. We got a lot of really good folks here. Also, there's a good shot that we have the Deputy UN Ambassador for Russia will join us on the show on Monday. We're working out the exact time, but we're really eager to have him on there, because we want to put it right to him himself, Ambassador Polyansky, to find out what is the Russian side on this. So I don't have to just grab sound bites from him. we can put him in the, in the hot seat and ask some tough questions, and we'll see what the Russian side has to say. So you're not going to want to miss that. And of course, we have lots of other great guests like we always will. Any kind of breaking news
By 2025, China's military is no longer just a regional force. It's a global powerhouse.
Tehran is rearming at speed.
Welcome, this is GVS Deep Dive. I'm Najma Minhas. The global arms trade is a chessboard, and for decades, the moves have been predictable. But there is a new player on the block, making strategic moves that are changing the entire game. More and more reports are coming out that we may be seeing a major shift in Chinese policy on supplying defense systems to friendly countries, something they have been reluctant to do so earlier. Israeli newspapers have started warning of increased military cooperation between Iran and China. We've seen the headlines about China supplying Iran with the advanced HQ-9B air defense system. But now it is believed that China is not only selling Iran surface-to-surface ballistic missiles, but also helping Iran in their production. China has earlier denied making arms sales to nations that are engaged in warfare. But currently, Iran and Israel are not officially in war. Much of Iran's existing air defense systems and missile facilities were destroyed after the joint US-Israel operations in June this year. So this replenishment is worrying the Israelis, given that they're keen on attacking Iran again, and they're only agreed to a ceasefire to replenish their own military supplies. So who is fanning the flames? Well, it was the Chinese themselves. The Chinese Defense Ministry recently said that China is willing to share military equipment achievements with friendly countries. Now, that might sound quite an ordinary statement, and until you remember Beijing's traditional caution. For decades, China has avoided being seen as a hard security backer of foreign states. It preferred to represent itself as a responsible global player and portrayed the United States, on the other hand, as the one fueling instability across the world. But this language was different. It was a signal this time round. Jiang Bin, the spokesperson for the Ministry of National Defense, made the remarks when commenting on recent reports that several countries are in discussions with China regarding weapon procurement plans that include China's J-10C fighter jet. Traditionally, when China has sold a weapon system, it has sold the export version, which is often less equipped than the actual weapon itself. Pakistan, for example, has the J-10CE. This is the export version, and that's slightly downgraded or its modified system versus the domestic variant of the J-10C itself. Similarly, it is equipped with the PL-15E, the export version of the missiles as well. For decades, China has avoided being seen as an active military backer of foreign states because that risked pulling it into conflicts and provoking the United States pressure on the one hand, something that it wasn't interested in doing, and on the other hand, it really just wanted to focus on its development goals. It's not clear that it has really changed that status even now, but several developments in 2025 have made Beijing rethink the balance of the risks and rewards for re-evaluating that policy. But to think this is just about Iran is to miss the bigger and the much more significant picture. China, in the past couple of years, as Russia became engaged in the Ukraine war, has stepped up to sell its military weapons on the global stage, especially to the global South countries that are interested in buying and often are shunned by the Western countries or not given those weapons on the deals, on the terms that they want. So today we're connecting the dots. Where else is this happening? What's the full scope of this strategy? What does it tell us about China's ultimate goal? And stay with me to the end to understand how will the West view this. Iran, of course, is the flashiest example. Important because it was just in a war against a superpower, the United States, and Israel. The Israeli military chief Eyal Zamir declared last week on the Israel Army radio that the IDF was ready to launch further strikes on Iran. The next Israel-Iran war is coming soon, as Trita Parsi also wrote recently in the Foreign Policy magazine.
Iran is expecting and preparing for the attack. It played the long game in the first war, pacing its missile attacks as it anticipated a protracted conflict. In the next round, however, Iran is likely to strike decisively from the outset, aiming to dispel any notion that it can be subdued under Israeli military dominance.
And he warned that the next battle would be far bloodier than the first. At the same time, Western intelligence agencies, particularly European agencies, according to Israeli newspapers, are reporting a growing close cooperation between Tehran and Beijing on the manufacture of these surface-to-surface missiles. In an exclusive story that was published by the Wall Street Journal as well, it reported that Iran had ordered thousands of tons of ballistic missile ingredients from China, and it believed that the ammonium perchlorate would be enough for Iran to produce 800 missiles. In the recent 12-day war between the two countries, the IDF estimates that Iran used between 400 to 550 missiles. It is believed that Iran has also bought in an oil for arms barter trade the advanced HQ-9B air defense system from China. Now, I did a vlog on this earlier. I will put a link to it in the description below with lots of details on this system and the repercussions of Iran buying this from China. Briefly, though, the HQ-9B system, which was developed by China's China Precision Machinery Import and Export Corporation, offers Tehran a leap forward in this multi-layer air defense coverage. These batteries are not symbolic. They can intercept aircraft and some ballistic missiles at ranges up to 260 kilometers away, with advanced phased array radars, which are able to track even the stealth fighters like the United States F-35s at over 300 kilometers. Practically speaking, that means from its western border, Iran can cover much of Iraq, including Baghdad, and even towards eastern Syria. United States aircraft operating from Iraqi bases would be within potential radar detection and engagement zones. Each HQ-9B missile can hit speeds of Mach 4.2 to Mach 4.7, which make them great counter-stealth and anti-missile weapons. Iran is now also showing an interest in China's J-10C, which is backed by its formidable PL-15E beyond visual range air-to-air missiles. It is particularly on their radar due to the urgency of their having to change their very old fighter fleet, but also because Moscow has repeatedly delayed deliveries of the Su-35 due to its own situation. Now, whether China will agree to sell these to Iran is another question. So far, it's only sold them to close allies like Pakistan. Iran knows that to prevent the Israeli strategy of mowing the lawn, it needs to hit back earlier. Iranian leaders believe the cost to Israel must be overwhelming, or else it will gradually erode Iran's missile capabilities and leave the country defenseless. The Iranian Defense Minister, Brigadier General Azizi Nasirzadeh, recently warned Israel that the missiles used in the conflict were old ones, but still proved effective in striking key targets, and that, in his words,
"We have stronger weapons that have not yet been employed. If the Zionist enemy chooses adventurism again, we will certainly use them."
Earlier this week, Amir Hayat Muqaddam, an Iranian lawmaker in Iran's parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Commission, said that Tehran can target US cities from offshore positions, and every European country is already within range of Iranian missiles. He said,
"We can move our ships to within 2,000 kilometers of the US, and from there target Washington, New York, and other cities," he said. "Right now, all European countries are within our range."
Now, remarks like this will worry Chinese decision makers, as they don't want their weapons to be involved in any such activity or even the threat of one. Now, China is building what can be only called as the Defense Silk Road, expanding from that infrastructure and 5G digital road into a global web of now defense dependencies, and Iran is just one piece. So I want to look at a few others. Algeria has become one of China's largest arms customers. They've purchased cutting-edge SY-400 short-range ballistic missile systems, the same type rumored for Iran. Out of the blue, the country has become the 5th largest arms importer globally and the leading importer in Africa. The Algerian Navy is also buying 6 additional Type 056 corvettes from China. Traditionally, the country bought military weapons from Russia, but they're now diversifying to reduce their dependence, a move being done as Russians became very busy in their war against Ukraine and found it difficult to supply military weapons elsewhere. Despite economic pressures such as double-digit unemployment, Algeria has allocated a military budget of $25 billion for 2025. Its status among the top 40 global military spenders is seen domestically as a strategic achievement, and it's believed that it's aimed at reminding that dissatisfied local population that the central government is still in control. They also operate Chinese-built frigates and are likely customers for that same HQ-9B air defense system. Algeria's decision to purchase more Chinese weapons also underscores the growing importance of China in global geopolitics, particularly in the North African region, where China is increasingly becoming a significant strategic partner. Algeria is a major regional power, and by arming it, China gains a firm foothold on the Mediterranean, directly south of NATO. Cairo's pivot towards China as a defense supplier under President Sisi reflects a clear strategy to reduce its dependence on the United States and Europe, whose restrictive arms export policies have often left Egypt's air force and missile arsenals technologically throttled. The United States has refused to sell anything to Egypt that undermines Israel's technological superiority. And despite having over 50 Dassault Rafales, F-3R fighters, planes that can carry that MBDA Meteor, that beyond visual range air-to-air missile, it's considered a game changer in air dominance for those that have it. But the French have refused to give it to the Egyptians because this critical capability is something that Israel refuses to allow others in the region to have. And it faces similar issues with the F-16 fleet, which is facing obstacles for getting clearance for BVR missiles, once again due to Israeli insistence on preserving what is called the qualitative military edge. It's a doctrine that guarantees Israel's technological lead over all other competitors in the region. Now, Egypt has officially begun operating China's HQ-9B long-range air defense system. Egypt is said to be also exploring additional acquisitions from China's rapidly expanding defense industry portfolio, including the famous J-10Cs and the stealthy J-35As. Buying Chinese systems for these countries also financially works out better, since they often come bundled up with more flexible financing options and the prospect of local assembly or technology transfers, which addresses another long-standing Egyptian demand for industrial offsets and a defense which is indigenous ecosystem in its own country. In April, the Egyptian Air Force and the People's Liberation Army Air Force made headlines when they staged their first ever joint air exercise, which was codenamed Eagle of Civilization 2025. Briefly, looking at Pakistan, China's largest and probably oldest customer. For years, China has been the primary arms supplier to Pakistan. This isn't new, but the quality is. We're talking over 60% of Pakistan's military imports being from China, including JF-17 fighter jets, which are jointly developed, and now even the advanced J-10CE fighters and the Type 052D destroyers. In Pakistan, it's the full integration of a military ecosystem, which is designed to lock in a strategic ally and tie down India. In fact, during the recent dogfight between Pakistan and India, it showed that the Chinese J-10Cs could not only hold their own in the skies, but that they were also able to bring down 3 of the French Rafales. And we cannot ignore the quiet, systematic penetration of other regions. Saudi Arabia, a traditional US ally, is now jointly producing armed drones with China. Even in South America, Venezuela has received Chinese military transports and radars. And given the latest action by the United States sending 3 Aegis-guided missile destroyers towards Venezuela, supposedly for counter-narcotics action, don't be surprised if Venezuela suddenly calls up China with more weapon orders. The pattern's clear. From Pakistan to Algeria to Iran, China is no longer selling just small arms. It's exporting integrated, high-tech, anti-excess aerial denial systems, air defense, missiles, drones, all that create strategic bubbles and fundamentally alter the military calculus in these regions. So is this a change in policy? Absolutely. But it's a logical evolution. China is reshaping the global arms trade. China is becoming a major weapons supplier, while shedding its historic dependence on foreign imports. In recent years, Chinese-made drones, missiles, and fighter jets have been exported to over 44 countries, from Pakistan and Myanmar to Nigeria and Algeria. A new report by Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, confirms this. As China ramps up domestic production and moves closer to defense self-sufficiency. However, despite all the scaremongering about Chinese weapons and arming all the so-called anti-Western countries out there, its total military exports, that is Chinese total military exports, declined by 5.4% during the period of 2020 to 2024. Many nations, particularly in Asia and Oceania, are still turning to Western suppliers. Political alignment, rather than pricing or capability, continues to shape arms markets, and it leaves China reliant on traditional partners rather than expanding into the more strategically influential and rich regions. China's core doctrine is still non-interference, but their interpretation is shifting over time. They are now understanding that for their trillions in the Belt and Road investments to be safe and for their economic partners to be stable, those partners need a hardened military shield or a powerful security partner. The drivers are clear. There is the strategic lock-in. Once a country's entire air defense or naval fleet is Chinese, they are tied to Beijing for parts, training, and upgrades for decades, the Western model. It's the ultimate loyalty program. It also dilutes the Western focus by creating multiple strategic headaches for the United States and its allies across the globe, from the Middle East to the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. China stretches their resources and makes it harder for them to focus on the Pacific. This is what superpowers ultimately do. The United States built a global alliance system through arms sales and security guarantees. China is now building its own, not with formal alliances, but with a network of supporting military client states. So how should the West perceive this? Well, this isn't a simple arms deal. It is a systemic challenge in the long term for them. The alarmist view sees this as the most dangerous form of escalation, directly undermining stability in the world's most volatile regions and creating a network of threats. And we know there are lots out there in the Republican Party, from that extreme right-wing Senator Tom Cotton to Elbridge Colby, who's currently the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. The realist view, with people like John Mersheimer, would say, welcome to the big league. This is realpolitik. And they'd argue that the West should respond by offering better and more reliable partnerships of its own. In his case, he's already been saying it for years. Close down the Russia-Ukrainian war. You're wasting your energies and your resources that should be focused on China. You should be bear-hugging Russia, not pushing it into the Chinese camp. And the third, more strategic view, West should understand that China is playing a long, patient game. They're not trying to win a single battle. They're trying to rewire the entire global security architecture, one arm deal at a time. The response can't just be sanctions on a specific sale. It has to be a coherent long-term strategy that offers countries a more attractive alternative for both economic development and security, something that has been severely lacking for quite some time. The bottom line is this. The Iran deal was never an isolated incident. It was a very public signal in a much broader campaign. And it's about China quietly building that defense Silk Road and tying countries into its orbit for decades to come. China is building a world where its interests are also increasingly protected by those it helps and supports, just as the United States did in the post-World War II era. This is the new stark reality of the 21st century geopolitics. What do you think? Is this China's smartest strategic move, or is it overextending itself and creating future conflicts that it can't control? Let's discuss in the comments. If you found this breakdown useful, please like and subscribe for the channel. It really helps me. Thank you for watching and have a great day.
Well, I think one of the most important part about SCO summit is there's going to be a separate on the side bilateral meeting between Modi and Xi Jinping. This right now, what we're seeing is a soft rapprochement between India and China after their border clashes in 2020. A lot of the groundwork has already been laid for this Modi's visit. You have Indian defense minister, national security advisor, foreign minister visiting China, and then you just had the Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi visiting India very recently. This is all to pave way for Modi's visit, but more importantly, for normalization of ties between China and India. Because since 2020 clash at the Gawan River Valley, the ties between India and China has been anything but normal, right? And like United States actually said, they publicly stated that they have provided India with satellite intelligence during that border clash. And India, for more recent years, they have been more aligned with United States in the so-called Quad to contain China. And India was also hoping to benefit from the decoupling from China, when the so-called China plus one strategy pushed by the Biden administration, or so-called friendshoring, to push Western multinationals to shift their supply chain out of China, and India was expected to receive much of that outsourcing. As we've seen with Apple, for example, Tim Cook moved more iPhone production to India to produce iPhone specifically for the U.S. market. But then we had this 180-degree turn in the U.S.-India relationship, thanks to the great peacemaker Donald Trump, because he has put such a squeeze on India right now that India have no choice but to seek closer tie with its fellow BRICS members, particularly to repair the relationship with China. I mean, that the process of normalization has been underway even before. Both sides has been meeting. I mean, all these meetings are scheduled way ahead of the time. It's not a last minute thing like the Alaska summit between Trump and Putin. We know that Alaska meeting was last minute because they didn't even have hotels ready for the Russian journalists coming in. They have to put them in stadium, right, with dividers, like an emergency field hospital wards, because it was it turns out it was fishing season in Alaska, so all the hotels were already booked. So that tells me that that Alaska meeting was a really last minute thing put together, because they don't even have time to book all the hotels. So whereas the India and China like SCO schedule, these has been ironed out long before. But what Trump did is he's just given an extra push for the India-China normalization. Right after Modi has been basically singing praises of Trump ever since he got elected, and Trump responded by slapping India on the face with, doubling the tariff to 50%, and demanding India to allow access. Zero tariff access for American agricultural products, which is a no-no for India, because India has more than 60% of its labor force employing in agriculture. That's not an area where India like to give up. So in this respect, I have to say, Indian leaders actually have more backbones than the Europeans. Because I'm sure you saw that picture of all these European leaders sitting around like school children at the White House waiting to be assaulted by Trump, and they just take it. They just sit there and take it, and call him daddy. That's just embarrassing, man. That's just so cringe. But so I have to give credit where credit is due. India at least have more strategic backbone, and they say no. They will not give up on the purchase of Russian oil. That's a ostensible reason for U.S. putting additional tariff on India, is for India's purchasing of Russian oil, because Trump has threatened to slap secondary sanction on anybody who buys Russian oil. But guess who is the largest purchaser of Russian oil? Number one is China. Number two is India. And China already said, who we buy oil from is our business.
Well, that's why
Russian oil.
Yeah, that's why, Carl, they couldn't. Trump couldn't say anything about China. As a matter of fact, he gave so-called the permission to China to go ahead and buy oil from us. Who the heck are you to give a permission? I didn't get it. Trump saying, "Yeah, we allow China to." It's like, no, man. They can buy oil from whomever they want.
That's exactly what the Chinese Foreign Ministry says. And we don't need permission from anybody to buy oil. This is our sovereign rights. And when Scott Bessent asked about it, it's like, oh, well, we can't. We're not. We already have tariff on China, so we're not going to put additional tariff, because he knows if they're going to raise that issue with China, we're just going to go back to the days of the month of May when Chinese ships simply stopped coming to Port of Los Angeles, and then that's when he had to chase the Chinese vice premier all the way to Europe to work out a trade truce. So they're not going to do that, and on top of that, China still have the U.S. by the balls in terms of rare earth shipment. Because right now all U.S. companies, they have to go to the Chinese Commerce Ministry to file application to ask, please, can I have export license for rare earth? And there's no way Trump is gonna risk that by putting additional tariffs on China. So the reason he's slapping India with more tariff is because India is a weaker party in its bilateral negotiation with United States. China has a strategic rare earth chokehold over United States. India doesn't. So this is why Trump feel like he can get away with it. It's like the bully logic, right? Why does the bully will choose the 1 second fight back? And this is why it comes as a shock to the Indian elite, because they, for a while, they thought they hitch on the U.S. bandwagon, and they're able to kind of ride the coattail of the U.S. hegemony and get access to more advanced U.S. technology, including military technology. But now we just had statement from Trump administration saying, "Oh well, we have concerns about giving advanced military technology to India because India's close tie with Russia, we feel like we could our technology could be compromised by through leakage to Russia and eventually to China. So we have to consider very carefully. So and also India didn't do itself any favors when Trump tried to claim credit for being the peacemaker to bring about the ceasefire between India and Pakistan conflict. Right after that conflict, Trump came out and said, I called both leaders, I told them to stand down unless you want more tariffs. And Pakistan played Trump very
like
well.
a fiddle.
They immediately welcomed it, and then they nominated Trump for Nobel Peace Prize. That Trump really loved that. I mean, that Trump is a big ego guy. Just butter him up a little bit, you can get what you want. That's exactly what Pakistan did. This is why Pakistan army chief was in Washington back in June. And that didn't play well with India at all. And India immediately came out and said, no, Trump has nothing to do with the ceasefire. We did it completely on our own because we have achieved our mission objective. Trump has not. So Trump really did not like that. Trump did not like to be contradicted publicly. And so that's an additional reason for him to slap India around.
Yeah. Well, that's true, because I was aware of the visit of the Field Marshal General Asim Munir, who came to Central Command for the ceremonies of the change in command there. So we're gonna get into India in a second, but I'm gonna need to ask you one key question, Carl, and I'd like to have your insight on it. In your assessment, do you believe the United States made a geopolitical mistake regarding India by pushing it into the orbit of China?
Well, definitely. If your goal is to preserve the U.S. empire and the U.S. imperial alliance system, you of course want India on your side, because India is still the world's most populous country. It has, by any matrix, India is a large regional power, and India is also very eager to sign on this U.S. anti-China bandwagon. So, why? I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to antagonize your allies such a way. But David, U.S. have no allies. U.S. have no partners. U.S. only have vassals, and this is why the difference between Biden and Trump is Biden at least put sugarcoated, call them allies, call them partners. Whereas Trump, he just tore the emperor's clothes open and says, "Hey, we are America first. So that means you got to come here and bend your knee and kiss my ring." And it's very hard to swallow for a proud country like India, because India, they see themselves as inheritor of a great civilization. They see themselves as a regional power. They don't want to play the part of just a pawn in the geostrategic chessboard of United States. They want to chart their own strategic autonomy. That's what they have been doing, kind of straddling between the Quad and then BRICS, because the idea was maybe that way India can get the best from both sides. But United States is not giving them that choice. U.S.'s policy has always been either you're with us or against us. So the fact that you are not 100% on board with our agenda, that makes you that will make us bring out the big sticks. And do I think that's a mistake for U.S. side? Absolutely. This is exactly what U.S. did with Russia back in 2000, early 2000. Vladimir Putin actually asked Clinton if Russia could join NATO, and Clinton had to say, "Oh, let me check with my people," and then he had to come back and say, "Sorry, my people said no," which raises a lot of interesting questions. Why couldn't Clinton make that kind of decision? And what kind of people what kind of people he was consulting? He was consulting with his own handlers, and so that's so. I mean, like the the India-China rapprochement has already been happening before the 180 turns by Trump administration. But Trump definitely gave a big push. It provided the urgency for India now to seek normalization with ties with China, particularly on trade, because they have announced India. So after 2020 border clash, India has put a whole slew of restrictions against Chinese investment inside the country, particularly in the tech sector. There was a lot of Chinese capital from like big player like Tencent, Alibaba, etc., into Indian tech startup scene before 2020. But that was all capped after Indian government came down really hard on Chinese investment, and India was the first country to ban TikTok. Also, and this is how where U.S. Congress got the idea to ban TikTok, claiming national security reasons. And right now, what they're taking baby steps to normalize the ties. So one of the things they're doing is try to restore the direct flight. Can you imagine that two of the world's most populous countries neighbors don't have direct flights? Because the direct flight was suspended during COVID, and it hasn't been restored till now. They're going to restore maybe next month. They're talking about next month. So this will be good for people to people exchange, because that's what's really needed for China and India to have more people to people exchange. So that way at least build the understanding of what's going on in each country. Do I think U.S. is making a big strategic mistake? Absolutely. But I think with but this current policy might just be a particularity of the Trump administration. And Trump, he changed his mind in like 2 days. He can change his mind over a tweet. So if U.S. decide to do another 180-degree face turn on India, I think they could still possibly salvage that alliance, because India still very much like to have access to the U.S. market, because a lot of the Indian IT sector depends on providing back office support for big U.S. multinationals. So that still remain unchanged. So so there's still a lot of, India very much would like to work with U.S. It's the U.S. that's pushing them away, right? It's so now they're being forced to draw closer ties with China. Not that they're not that they that's what they really wanted to do. So if U.S. do change course, they can still potentially make India reverse course.
Well, I still believe into that. I'm holding my judgment till I see certain development of certain events before I reach my final conclusion as to whether India is sincere about this rapprochement with China. Because here's the thing, Carl, and please correct me if I am wrong. If we are to say, which I concur with you, that the US has made so far a geopolitical mistake by pushing India into the arms of China, I'm going to have to ask the counter arguments to that, especially from an Indian perspective. To me, the way I see it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is India pivot to China? Is it because a desperation move or a strategic one?
Well, that's a great question, because I think first I call it a soft rapprochement. We're not talking about Hindi returning back to the Hindi Chini bye-bye period, the China-India brotherhood period of early 1950s. That period is gone, never coming back. We're talking about just normalization of ties, because the ties between two countries has been anything but normal since 2020 border clash. So right now, their first top priority is just simply have a normal relationship. Restoring the trade, restoring the direct flight is the first step, and then India have promised to lift some restriction against the Chinese investment. And it's going to take that process is going to take it's going to take time to rebuild the trust. One of the issue is the border issue still remain a big thorny side on the bilateral relations, because for China have proposed, okay, let's put our differences aside on the borders. Let's work on other aspects of our relationship, because we are big countries and we have many overlapping interests in the other area we can cooperate on. This is kind of the China's a foreign policy approach in a lot of areas. For example, in the South China Sea dispute, that's what China proposed. Let's shelve our dispute, but let's work on our other areas of cooperation. For example, economic cooperation. But for India's side, has always been an insistence. No, we gotta solve the border issue first. Resolve the border issue first before we can even work on the other areas. But the problem is, when it comes to resolving the border issue, China had very reasonable proposal back in late 50s, early 60s that said, hey, let's just make the current line of actual control the permanent international border. Then all we got to do is then sit down and hammer down where exactly is the line of actual control, and demarcate it, and then we're done. But India refused that offer. That led to the 1962 Sino-Indian border war. And this and a lot of the border clash that happened in more recent years is because there's no clear demarcation. And there's first of all, they have overlapping claims, but right now there's not even a agreement on where the line of actual control is. The Indian side thinks that the line of actual control is, maybe 50 meters, 100 meters to the east, and where the Chinese thinks that the line of actual control is 100 meters, 200 meters to the west. So what happened is, when the two patrol team come to patrol their own areas, what they think is a line of actual control, when they come into contact, and there's border skirmish. And so that hasn't been helping, and this is my take. I think the Indian military also has a stake in not resolving this border issue immediately, because this is a very easy way to justify increase in defense spending. Whenever the border clash flare up, that's more chance to ask for more funds to devote it into shoring up the border security. So I think and especially like in the back in 2020 Gawang River clash, India side of course blaming China for instigating it, but I just felt the timing was odd, because prior to that, there was a period where India and China relation had been relatively good. You had Modi visiting China, and things were looking up. Like, it does not make sense, at least from a Chinese perspective. Why would you then, push a border issue dispute to sharply deteriorate a bilateral relationship? But we do know U.S. had a hand in that, because the Wall Street Journal report says U.S. intelligence official very proudly announced that they have supplied Indian side with satellite intelligence during the border clash, because obviously that played well to U.S. strategy of bringing India closer into the quad of anti-China alliance, which now Trump is single-handedly dismantling. This is why I call Trump my president for accelerationism, and he is my president for international peace and cooperation. Give that man a Nobel Peace Prize already. He deserves
just for that, for dismantling organization. That is true. That is true. Well, on a serious note, Carl, and I am glad you brought up the issue of the border. I've been arguing since the beginning of this development here. And I said, if India is sincere about really this relationship with China, that you want to re-strengthen their relationship and so forth, it has to do two things. One of them, in my opinion, is resolve the border issue. And second one is to show sort of good faith, is to withdraw from Quad. Well, Trump is doing that on its behalf, maybe. But for the border issue, I believe India will not want to move into that direction. In addition to what you stated, which I concur with you 100%, it is also my belief that why India will not want to resolve the border issue is because it does not want the neighboring countries, the likes of Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, given what's going on in Bangladesh, to establish any economic ties with China. And that is the way I'm reading it. Am I wrong in this?
I mean, okay, let's just look at the facts, right? China had, when People's Republic of China was established in 1949, it had inherited the border dispute with basically all its neighbors. This is a result of colonial era border drawn by colonial powers. You know, it's particularly the Sino-Indian border. It was just literally arbitrary line drawn by the British, and then China over the last 70, 80 years has sat down to work out border agreement with its neighbors. So today, there's still maritime disputes, you know, South China Sea, East China Sea, whatever. But China has resolved all land border dispute with its neighbors, including Russia, Mongolia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and with the exception of two countries. That's India and Bhutan. And Bhutan is because Bhutan's foreign policy is is handled by India. So you see a common denominator here. It's the Indian side that refused to negotiate on the border issue. You know, China has resolved its long land border dispute with Russia in the early 2000s, with Vietnam, the land borders with Vietnam, with all the Central Asian former Soviet republics. India is the one that's it's the thing is, there are two major area of dispute on the border. There's one in Aksai Chin in the north, and the one what India calls the Arunachal Pradesh, what China calls the Southern Tibet, and China controls Aksai Chin. India claims it. India controls Arunachal Pradesh / South Tibet, and China claims it. Back in late 50s, early 60s, Zhou Enlai proposed deal is okay. You know, if you recognize our hold on Aksai Chin, which we already control, and then we will recognize your control over. You know, at that time, India didn't call it Arunachal Pradesh; they call it like Northeastern Frontier Agency, whatever. But we'll recognize your claim that on the land you control. Then we'll make an international border, so there'll be no more dispute. But India rejected that deal, and ever since there has been no movement on that issue because India would want both, like they want to. They want to get all their claims. Now they don't see this as a give and take negotiation. They just like to have their claims.
All of it.
So it's really hard. So it's really hard to conduct a negotiation in such a case. And also you have to remember India is quote unquote democracy, so they have a lot of you know, different. I don't think any Indian leader have the political will and the strength to say, oh, we have gave up this border claim in regards to China. Like that would be political suicide in India. So that's why nobody want to do it. Nobody want to touch that issue. And because of that, I think that the border issue will always be, will always be there, always be persisting. I mean, there are ways to ameliorate the issue. One is both sides pull back from certain distances from their perceived line of actual control, so there won't be any contact of the border patrols. But it's not really; these are not really long-term solutions. And there's so I don't see, unfortunately, I don't see a resolution to the border issue anytime soon, in the immediate future or the intermediate future. But on the India side, they're not right now. They're not. They're
not ready for
I
that.
mean, they're definitely being pushed. They're also definitely being pushed by basically rejection by Trump to try to fix their relationship with China. I mean, so it's by circumstances. They're being pushed by circumstances to improve their tie with China. There's still a lot of distrust about China, both from the Indian public, who has been misled, who have been many times misled, I would argue, by the Indian media, and I just don't. I just don't see that this Indian China ties will ever get to like back in the the honeymoon period of the early 50s. I mean the best they can do is to have some sort of détente where it's not warm, it's not cold, it's just like normal room temperature relationship. So but at least the two sides can get together to trade, because there's a lot of trading between the two countries, and there's a lot of also Chinese investment looking for investment opportunity in India, because India is a large market. So there are areas that the two sides can cooperate on, many areas, and there could be more people-to-people exchanges. But but the fundamental issue, I think, is still the border, and I don't see the border getting resolved anytime soon.
Well, I'm using it as a yardstick by which I will gauge the truly intentions of the Indian government towards really ameliorating or improving the relationship with China on all levels, politically, economically, and socially as well. So, because when I look at this, Carl, and once again, I know some been criticizing me for being too harsh on India, and all I'm doing is providing the facts or placing the facts on the table. Because when I read the recent statement of India regarding South China Sea, and the claim of the support for what the Philippines is doing, and in addition to India selling missiles to Philippines, it makes me just wonder, Carl. And I am like, well, wait a minute. You want to have an improved relations with China, and you turn back and stab it in the back? It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. What do you think?
And Indian Navy had just recently had a joint exercise with the Filipino Navy, in the South China Sea. I mean, like so what India sees itself doing is they see that China have friendly relationship with all its neighboring countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, and India feels, okay, this is a Chinese conspiracy to contain India. So we're gonna do the reverse. We're gonna form alliance with like Mongolia, with Vietnam, with the Philippines to contain China. I mean, that's literal talking points in the Indian media. There was I remember a few years back there were like joint India Mongolian military exercise called like nomadic elephants, but these are just for show. These are just PR. Like how. There's no conceivable scenario where India and Mongolia can ally together militarily against China. You guys don't share a border. Mongolia is landlocked between China and Russia, and so these are all for show. It's great
Yeah.
for PR, but it's meaningless. And even the the talk about how India is gonna ally with countries in South China Sea to create problems for China. Like, look, most of the countries in the South China Sea, with the exception of the Philippines, are happily trading with China right now. I mean, like the idea that somehow India is going to ally with Vietnam against China is ridiculous.
No.
Vietnam, they just rolled the red carpet for Xi Jinping, and they had a recently Vietnam and China just hold the first ever Vietnamese Chinese military joint exercise, since forever.
Yeah.
So and this is the fantasy of United States and some Indian elite as well to somehow using Vietnam as a counterweight against China is just that. It's fantasy. And the only Philippines is willing to play the role of Ukraine in Asia, in East Asia. And so I mean, like so I'm what India could really do is take a chapter from China's playbook, concentrate on its own domestic development, right? To build infrastructure, to grow its economies, and once you are strong, you can attract more allies. You can have more relationships, and also you can push back against bullying attempt by people like persons like Trump, because to Trump, China can say no because China actually hold cards, and right now in bilateral relationship between India and United States, India is a weaker party because India don't have much cards when it comes to the United States.
Yeah, you're right. You mentioned Southeast Asia and how India wants to sort of develop relations. It's not going to succeed. That to me, it's not putting India down. It just does not have what China does, and especially when you consider, for example, BRI and all the investments that have been poured into this. My dear, I have a dear friend, Dr. Dashuan Fang, just had his book BRI translated to the Chinese language. So I'm going to share it with you guys. I'll see if I can get a link to that and put it up for you. But it's the idea that here you look at countries that, they look in long term as far as improving economic ties with China, because it's going to benefit them and it's going to benefit China as well. It's a win-win. India is not willing to go that route. And again, that's to me why I am holding on this hoopla la about, oh my gosh, India is going to China. It's like, hold on a second. There are some fundamental issues that have to be resolved.
I think it's I know India get a lot of flags. They're being called the weakest link in the BRICS, etc. But I think there's some reasonable expectation on India, because India has a very different vision for BRICS than other BRICS members. Like Russia and China, they see BRICS as alternative to a world system to push back against the U.S. dominated world institutions. They see BRICS as a alternative to U.S. global hegemony. India wants a alternative, but they don't want BRICS to be anti-Western. They don't want BRICS to be anti-US. This is why India was against the BRICS currency that was pushed by Brazilian President Lula. This is because India came out specifically said, we're fine with the dollar, right? We're happy to trade in the dollar system. And they do not want BRICS to be seen as an anti-American alliance. Even though Trump sees BRICS as anti-American alliance anyway, but India still do not want to position. They do not want to be seen as anti-Western and anti-US, because India itself is not anti-US, anti-Western. So they don't want the large grouping of BRICS also to be seen as anti-US, anti-Western, because India very much would like to work with the US, and it's kind of like lot of the willingness right now, it's on the Indian side to work with the US. It's the Trump that's rejecting them, and this is why it hurts really bad, because you are kind of India is kind of like the jilted lover right now. It's been rejected by by Trump. And but it is what it is.
At the same time, Carl, at the same time, we cannot forget, I will not forget, how, for example, India has been a roadblocks in not only BRICS, but also in ASEO. So, and didn't, because I recall this one, didn't want to join China earlier last year. If you remember, when China wanted a united global South, India didn't want to join that one. Because why? It gravitated towards the US. It's because it was the thinking at that time that Trump was their mate, per se. And look where the outcome is. This is why, I mean, I need to see concrete evidence coming out of New Delhi before I'll say, oh, India now is really pivoting towards China, and go from there. So,
but by having said that, I still give them India props for having more backbones than Europeans.
That's true.
Right? I mean, they actually stood their ground and said, yeah, they actually stood ground and said, we are going to continue to buy Russian oil. We're not going to place our traditional friendly relationship with Russia at risk because to please United States, because that's what US want them to do. They want India depends on Russia for weapon system purchase and for Russian oil. Trump want India to purchase US energy, US oil and gas, and US weapons. And India said no, like we can't do that because like our ties with Russia is too important for us to reject it out of hand. Which makes sense because India is actually making a lot of money re-exporting Russian oil and gas to Europe right now. It's like after 2022, somehow India just discovered this large reserve of oil somewhere in the north and start to export into Europe. Everybody knows what's going on.
5 times the price. Out of 5 times the price.
And and Europe is just paying the premium because they have to, and then they go to Washington to be scalded by Trump because they have to.
That was very humiliating. So, and we're gonna get into that, especially when it comes down to one particular European country. So, I want to get your take on one aspect regarding this before I move into Europe here. The recent visits, which we talked briefly about, the Mr. Wang Yi visiting India, but that's not what I want to focus on. I want to focus on the day after he visited New Delhi, when he met with the representatives of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Once again, Carl, I'm reading into this as a strategic move on part of China to ensure that if India wants to play double sword per se, or play or be on both sides of the fence, he won't succeed. Is this the reason for the meeting between Mr. Wang Yi and the representatives of Pakistan and Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, China has a long-standing tie with Pakistan, and China has also friendly ties with Afghanistan. Even before U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, China already had a working relationship with Taliban. China, during the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, China had a friendly relationship with the government in Kabul, which is a puppet government supported by U.S. After the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan, China continued to have friendly relationship with Taliban-led Afghanistan government. This is because China understands Afghanistan is a neighbor. China want to have friendly neighboring relationships. And Pakistan on the other side, they have this so-called China-Pakistan Iron Brotherhood. China had a very tight relationship with Pakistan ever since 1962, China-Indian border war. That's when Pakistan sensed the opportunity and made an overture to China. And since then, the Pakistan and China has been very tight. There is a change in the more recent after the Indian-Pakistan conflict. That was there was a warming of ties between Pakistan and United States, right? After Pakistan buttered up Trump calling him the peacemaker, nominate him for Nobel Peace Prize, and now Trump is saying, "Oh, we can work with Pakistan. Pakistan has so many minerals. We're gonna get those minerals, and Pakistan have oil." And all the Pakistanis scratching their heads like, "We have oil? What?" And then Trump probably just, "Oh, Pakistan is this a Muslim country, probably somewhere in the Middle East, must have a lot of oil, right?" And and so Wang Yi's visit at this juncture is to reaffirm China-Pakistan ties, and it's not, because I think there's also a U.S. attempt to possibly try to peel Pakistan away from China. And in the aftermath of the Pakistan-Indian conflict, and just like Trump holds an Alaska summit, part of the reason is they want to peel Russia away from China. They keep on talking about reverse Kissingering, right? Like how they're going to make peace with Russia so U.S. can concentrate on China and possibly draw Russia together against China. They've been talking about this for years. So possibly U.S. is also trying to do that with Pakistan, but I don't think that's going to happen. Either with Russia or Pakistan, right? Their relationship with China is pretty solid right now, and so Wang Yi's visit is to reaffirming the ties, but at the same time, to mediate the relationship between China, to triangulate the relationship between Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China. Right? I mean, the ties between Afghanistan and Pakistan at times can be quite testy, but China wants stability among its neighborhood, right? They doesn't want any conflict, and the Wang Yi's visit actually they have a very important topic to be discussed, which is bring Afghanistan into the broader framework of China-Pakistan economic corridor. So Afghanistan is being brought in under the BRI umbrella, right? Because the China-Pakistan economic corridor, that's the flagship project of the BRI, of the Belt and Road Initiative, and now China is about to extend that the investment framework into Afghanistan, which kind of naturally makes sense because all three countries are neighbors, and China do have a lot of interest in Afghanistan. Afghanistan have one of the world's largest copper reserves and a lot of reserve for rare earth minerals, for example. And I think Chinese oil company also did some exploration over there. So China want to see Afghanistan develop. It's the same reason China want to see Pakistan to develop economically. So because a prosperous neighborhood is a guarantee for stability, and that stability in its neighborhood is what China really after. And the China is still trying to build this. The whole idea of China-Pakistan economic corridor is for China to have another alternative route to reach Persian Gulf, right? And this is why they're developing the Gwadar port in Pakistan, which sits like 100 miles from the mouth of the Persian Gulf. And the idea is that the energy from Persian Gulf then can be unloaded in Gwadar and possibly transported via a pipeline across Pakistan into northwest China. That way, all this energy supply will not have to traverse the Strait of Malacca, which U.S. Navy made no secret of wanting to be the choking point against Chinese energy supply. So the bringing the Taliban from Afghanistan into this project is just part of a broadening the Belt and Road Initiative across the entire Central Asia. Right.
That's an interesting point, and I couldn't agree more, Carl, because I just see it going that direction as well, and this is why even why the U.S. went ahead and brought in Armenia and Azerbaijan for an agreement only for us to set up shop in Armenia. And we know why. It's because we want to prevent any pipeline going into that direction. So, but how do you make up of this decision by Meloni now to restrict the Chinese investments after it was the one, of course, under pressure from the United States? And when we look at this picture, it speaks for itself. What do you think, Ar?
Well, yeah, this is again, this is due to U.S. pressure, right? And Meloni is trying to curry favor with Trump, obviously, because U.S. has threatened tariff again against Italian companies that has a state like that Chinese that had any kind of Chinese ownership, even a minority stake, and for example, one of the Italian tire maker, the Pirelli tires, they claim that the sensors they put on the tires could be used to spy on American citizens, right, for surveillance. It's like because really, Xi Jinping has nothing better to do to try to monitor what's going on the everyday roads in Middle America, and of course that's just the excuse.
That's ridiculous.
This is a series of effort that U.S. has initiated back during the first Trump term. This is when back when U.S. had pressured UK and Germany to cancel Huawei's role in building up the 5G network in Europe, and now they're extending it to everything. They're extending it to like tires companies. Italy, for its part, they receive a lot of Chinese investment after 2008 financial crisis, right? Countries like Italy, Greece, they were welcoming Chinese investment to come to their country, to save their asses, and now they're singing a different tune because U.S. is kind of worried about China making inroads into Europe, and that also Chinese investment into Europe is also prying Europe away from the transatlantic alliance, right? And this is the logic of decoupling. It's really kind of tightening the American grip on its vassal states, like Italy, like the other EU countries, and Meloni is only happy to comply because she feels she just have to make some concessions to make Trump happy. So it is what it is, and China will find other partners. I mean, China is already investing in more countries more welcoming to Chinese investment, like Serbia or Hungary. And BYD is building factories in Hungary and Serbia, right? So they'll find a way. China will find other. If they're not welcoming Italy, they will reduce their stakes, like some Chinese company has already done, and they will move elsewhere. I mean, it's the Italians' loss, but China is the one with actual money. They can take their money elsewhere.
I won't be surprised that we will see another visit by Meloni to Beijing in 6 or 7 months. So that's usually how they do it. So I'll give you a last word, my friend. I'll give you a last word about how do you see, first of all, this literally, this is to me, it's an indication of really where Europe is right now, politically and economically. That just sums it up. And what are
there is no
go ahead, Carl.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Now I was going to say, just politically and economically, they are done for, Europeans. For the India part, I'm still putting question mark. What do you think? I'll give you a last word.
There's no strategic autonomy in Europe. There is none. I mean, all the European leaders are put in their position precisely to be the voice of Washington. Like von der Leyen, she was elected by 40 people. 40 people. She has no I mean, she does not have to answer to average Europeans on the street on what she did for them. Her job is to be the pliant puppy dog to whoever's in the White House. Whether Biden, Trump, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And the Europeans right now, they there was a time, I'm old enough to remember, back in Iraq War, European leaders actually showed some backbone to resist and to criticize the Iraq invasion,
I recall.
right? And that seems so long ago now. Like this is now everybody just kneel over and rush to Washington to kiss the ring, and I don't see any possibility of Europeans kind of break free of their bondage to the Americans. It's done. Europe is done. Europe is as for Washington, for India, I mean, India will find itself. Its maneuver room is getting increasingly restricted. For a while they were able to straddle the fence right between the West and the East, and they can say, "Oh, we're the brick South," and then they go to Washington, say, "Hey, we are MIGA and MAGA, make India great again and make America great again." It's the same thing. It makes MAGA, and but now. But they now have to come to realize the true nature of U.S. empire. U.S. empire does not want allies, does not want partners. They only want pliant vassals, complete blind obedience. And I think that's too tough of a pill for even India to swallow. So they will continue to try to do the best. But I don't think India and China ties will ever gonna be like the China-Russia tie, for example.
No, they won't.
It's never gonna get there. And this is just because the way Indian government is structured. Because right now the Indian both opposition and the ruling party, they're trying to outdo each other to see who is the more anti-China party. So I mean, that's just not gonna. They're gonna accuse each other of selling out to China, right? And when there's anytime there's a border skirmish or a border negotiation, so there's that border issue will never be resolved. But I think there's still possibility for at least a lukewarm relationship between India and China, meaning there will be competition, there will be commercial trade competition, but there even be strategic competition. But I think at least they can go on and carrying a bilateral trade, and to remove some of the restrictions. I think that's the best we can hope for. I mean, China always hold the door open for a better India-China ties, because people don't understand why India is not dependable, whatever. No, you don't want to push India into your opponent's camp the way Trump is doing. You don't want to do a Trump, right? You don't. India, regardless, is still a very important country. It's a large populous country with a large market. You don't want it to be the fully inside the enemy camp. You want at least to have some kind of relationship, working relationship with India. And also for India and China, the border, at least for China, the border dispute is really a distraction. For China's focus, strategic focus is still Taiwan. It's still South China Sea. I mean, to any kind of resources that have to be diverted to the Himalayan border, it's just really unnecessary distraction. So China on its own has an interest to kind of dial down to see the border tension dial down between India, and so it can shift more of its focus towards the Pacific. I mean, the same way that U.S. some in the U.S. national security establishment argue that the United States should get the F out of Ukraine, get the hell out of West Asia, in the Western Pacific. In the same way, China does not need the distraction of having a side border conflict with India, while the real threat is posed by United States to its east, to its eastern flank. So any kind of détente with India is still welcome, and I think my best hope for India-China relationship is just people-to-people exchange. You know, to have more people traveling between the two countries will help build some understanding. But I don't expect any kind of breakthroughs. I mean, just have realistic expectation that you will at best lukewarm, and hopefully it doesn't turn ugly. That's the best you can hope.
Let's hope it doesn't get to that. But also, the reality suggests that India has an uphill battle in front of it to reach the level of China's economic developments. I mean, when you look at China's numbers, the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, there is no comparison to those. Even some scholars in the West that argue about, well, India's economy and it will play a role in the global stage, maybe in the next 25 years, 30 years, maybe, but not in a short term. That's just my opinion. So, well, my dear friend Carl, I can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge with us, with the community. We are always excited to see you here, and I look forward to our conversation next month. So, wish you a good day. I know it's Sunday.
Coffee. Follow me.